Chapter 765. In the end, Dongfang became the scapegoat. I'm a bit worried. If teacher Xiaoqing finds out the truth in the future, will he? Cui Zhedong didn't ask any more questions, and Li Jiedu didn't answer either. Instead, he talked about the method he used to deal with the members of Group 7. No matter how great and complicated a cause is, it's all made up of specific details. That's why I won't overlook any details, and I won't underestimate any potential enemies. For example, that officer named by Yulan, or those members who seemed like they couldn't cause any trouble. Many people seem to have forgotten the hidden backgrounds behind those members. Even if Su Lu really did die, if those members were united by someone with the intention of forming a force, that force would still be very impressive. He suddenly had a trace of self-deprecation. In all these years, I've only made one mistake in this regard. In the end, because of this mistake, Byron and those old fellows left us before we could see victory. You're talking about Shi Qinghai? Cui Zhedong asked. Yes, Shi Qinghai. Li Jiedu's gaze was complicated. I thought I had already paid enough attention to him, and I made a very powerful arrangement to end his life. But in the end, I realized that this person deserved more attention. Killing him should have been done even more. In the twilight, Cui Zhedong suddenly said, I heard that teacher Yu is back. Old people always have a temper. They don't want to stay in the sanatorium for long. We can only respect his wishes. Li Jiedu lowered his gaze slightly and said indifferently, but now that the front lines are in a state of emergency, and the offensive at the end of spring may be delayed, I think that the front lines need iron soldiers like the new 17th Division. The problem is that the front lines suffered a setback this time, and only one regiment failed. Cui Zhedong quickly understood what he meant. He was shocked and frowned as he voiced his doubts. Li Jiedu walked into the room with his teacup and said indifferently, most of the time, propaganda is used to exaggerate the front line's victory, but sometimes it can also be used to exaggerate losses. For this failure, the government will definitely need someone to stand up and take responsibility. There will also need to be some changes. Army mutiny? This new generation leader of the military had never worried about this problem. Yu Chenghai's sudden return to the 17th Division from the sanatorium had indeed brought him some trouble, but he could not use forceful methods to suppress the other's anger. Thus, he quickly came up with a new plan to bring the 17th Division back to the front lines in the shortest time possible. He could have used simpler and tougher methods to deal with the problem of the 17th Division, but they were in the midst of a war. Even the craziest and most ambitious person knew that the army could not be in chaos, and there could not be any risk factors of division. As for the Westwoods troops that were loyal to the Zhong family, they had to be slowly weakened and disintegrated in such a secretive way, and finally be melted into the furnace of the federal forces. More importantly, Li Jiedu's connections and control in the military. Other than the young officers, the most important ones were the military leaders who had gradually left. These real leaders were his father's most loyal subordinates. No matter how much they admired Su Lu, they would not stand against him just because of Su Lu. Just like how Commander Yu Qinghai had very naturally lamented. Li Jiedu is still a member of the Oldley family after all. In other words, in the eyes of these leaders, he was still one of them, a child they had watched grow up. No matter what he did, he should just be naughty and mischievous. But if he really used forceful methods to deal with Yu Qinghai, it would truly disappoint these leaders. The leaders who had already left were still the real leaders of the military, such as General Miles. Furthermore, a leader like Yichan Tian was now the Federation's frontline commander. Li Jiedu was definitely not willing to take the risk of disappointing these people just because of Yu Qinghai alone. Moving the difficult-to-deal-with Commander Yu Qinghai and his 17th Division to the front lines would not raise any objections from these leaders. These old fellows who were used to being iron-blooded naturally believed that the old division commander's troops should naturally grow on the battlefield. But Du Xiaoqing and his Iron 7th Division would probably be more willing to fight against the Empire on the front lines and not chase after that guy around the Federation's own city. Last night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., where were you? In a dark room, a Federation Investigation Bureau official lowered his body and stared like a wolf at the chubby man in front of him, who looked extremely honest. He was almost roaring as he interrogated. I forgot. Forgot? How come I remember that you were arrested in the Ministry of Finance building's toilet? You still ask if you know? Gu Shifeng's eyes widened as she looked at the crazy guy in front of her. She thought to herself, is this a cop movie? How can there be such a retarded dialogue? Why did you appear in the Ministry of Finance building so late at night? The Federation Investigation Bureau official angrily unbuckled his belt. His movements were very handsome and fierce, just like a character in a movie. Gu Shifeng's eyes were still wide open as she said, because the scenery was good from that angle. The official was stunned for a long time before he slammed the table and loudly questioned, then how do you explain the equipment we found in the toilet? F***CK. I'm a soldier. Of course, I have to bring equipment to eat. Gu Shifeng was clearly even angrier than the official who interrogated her. She slammed the table with even more force than the other party. Her voice was also louder and more confident. I've been to the front lines. I'm a war hero. What's with your attitude? You're not allowed to torture a war hero. May 17th, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Where were you? The obviously tired official rubbed his messy hair and stared at Gu Shifeng across the table. I don't know. Gu Shifeng slammed the table heavily and angrily shouted at the Federation Investigation Bureau official, don't do anything. I'm a soldier. I've been to the front lines. I'm a war hero. The members of Team 7, who were arrested around Charter Square, were now detained in an abandoned factory in the suburbs of the capital. They were under joint investigation by the FBI and the military police department. Just like this, they repeated the boring process. God knows how many days had passed. Group 7 was a hero group that the Federation government had put a lot of effort into building. Who in the Federation hadn't seen the documentary? This place wasn't far from the front lines of the Federation, so the members were treated well when they were locked up. They weren't handcuffed and were even housed in a dormitory. It really made these guys recall their days as new recruits. Seeing Gu Shifeng being pushed in by the military police, Da Vinci, who was scratching his feet, mocked, Bosku, don't tell me you only know how to say the same few words over and over again. F***CK. Don't you find it annoying to say the same few words every day? He moved his left leg with some difficulty and said with a smile, you should learn from me. I scolded the head of the military police today. They don't dare to use torture, so why shouldn't they scold me? The members in the room all agreed. Stop talking nonsense. Gu Shifeng sat down on the bed and subconsciously flicked his 10 round fingers on the bed. I'm not like you guys. I don't have a governor for a father, and I don't have a billionaire for a grandfather. If those guys really want to torture me, I can't do anything. The members heard this and didn't care about Gu Shifeng's status as a temporary commander. They all mocked him for hating his father for not being an official. Da Vinci's father was the governor of Xixia State. Like him, many of the members of the team had extremely terrifying backgrounds. The Federation Investigation Bureau and military police wanted to torture this group of young masters. That would probably cause a large group of Federation officials to protest angrily. Back then, President Pabre had sent these hedonistic soldiers who lived corrupt lives in the Harbor City Garrison District to Sulu for political reasons. But who would have thought that these hedonistic soldiers would actually be turned into the most outstanding Federation soldiers by Sulu? Now, the backgrounds and family backgrounds of these hedonistic soldiers had become a big problem for the president's official residence. Sulu, this Donglin rock, had once successfully resisted the pressure of the Federation officials and turned these hedonistic soldiers into sweaty red meat on the training field. President Pabre, this Donglin rock, had to manage the Federation, but he couldn't be as valiant and cold as him. Speaking of which, you guys have always been unconvinced by the old members. Gu Shifeng rolled his eyes amidst the laughter of his team members and said mockingly, now you see the difference, right? I told you not to touch this guy, and what happened? All the old guys ran away, and you guys were all caught. Huh, look at Da Vinci's pathetic appearance. He actually got shot. That's true. The bullet doesn't know you're the eldest son of the governor's family. Da Vinci couldn't take it anymore. He glared and shouted, Boss Goo, I'm going to flip out if you say that. Also, you have to call me by my full name, Da Vinci. After a pause, he said shamelessly, speaking of which, you're also an old member. How did you get caught like us? Gu Shifeng's face turned red. In order to avoid this shameful question, he quickly became serious and said to his team members, apart from the fact that you guys have terrifying backgrounds, there's another reason why the government is so polite to us. If the boss isn't caught by them, they won't dare go too far. If there's a problem with the boss, I'm warning you guys, even if you have some good fathers, there will still be problems. It had to be said that his method of changing the topic was very successful. The team members in the dormitory collectively fell silent. They weren't worried about how they would be hurt, but they were worried about the boss's current safety. In an extremely inconspicuous coffee shop in the capital, Chief Editor Bob wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the young man wearing a hat and said self-deprecatingly, Literati are literati after all. They're useless. I've never been as nervous as I am today. Expressing bravery in the newspaper is indeed much easier than in reality. Don't worry. I'm sure no one followed you here. The young man used his index finger to push up the brim of his hat and revealed a comfortable smile. Suddenly, he heard a commotion outside the coffee shop. He looked out the window in confusion, and a moment later, his small eyes revealed shock and complicated emotions. There was a sunset in the sky above the street at dusk. It was as red as blood, and there was a group of young students wearing black masks. They were from the Capital University. They walked silently under the gazes of the people on both sides of the street. In the front row, they held two long banners. We use silence to denounce the persecution of the Federation's heroes. Colonel Sulu, you're not alone. 4 chapters completed. 2 chapters were added yesterday, so I'll hold back on that one. I'm going to seriously ask everyone to give me a few more free recommendation votes. I'm going to be pushed out of next week's rankings. I'll have to trouble everyone to use your fingers. My job is to use my fingers, so I know this job is really hard. 2 chapters tomorrow. If you're good enough and find the state you're in today and write happily, then 3 chapters. But it'll be difficult. I said I was in a good state today, so the answer is, I smoked today. Yes, I'll continue to quit tomorrow. I swear, within a week after I finish these cigarettes in front of me, I'll smoke another cigarette. I can't expect to earn a single cent from writing in this lifetime. Chapter 766. Bob watched the young students wearing black masks walk past the window. He smiled at Sulu and said, although no one knows the truth of the incident, I think you should feel a little proud that so many people support you without asking for any reason. Sulu lowered his head and slowly and seriously stirred the black coffee in the cup until the burnt smell that he didn't like was completely removed. He said softly, I'm a little touched, but it's hard for me to feel proud. He raised his head, and his straight eyebrows under the shadow of his hat appeared particularly calm. The reason lies in what you said about not asking for any reason. Now, the people in the Federation still believe that I'm a hero of the Federation, so they support me without any reason. But what if I'm really a criminal who uses the mask of a hero to hide his evil? Chief Editor Bob frowned. He didn't understand why he felt this way. The scene just now reminded me of the Macklin Project. When we were trying very hard to send that senator to court, the streets of the entire Federation were filled with angry young students. Sulu looked at the chief editor and said, which should have already told you that the guy who sent the evidence to the newspaper was the attacker who broke into Parliament Hill a few days ago. He's also my best friend. I also know that this guy named Shi Qinghai participated in the assassination of Macklin with you. Of course, after that, he was tacitly approved by the Federation government, and the so-called assassination became a purge operation. Bob was still frowning and asked, but why would you think of this? The people on the streets may have misjudged and supported the wrong side, but I've always insisted that they don't need to be responsible for these things, because the Federation government, the Parliament, and those big shots in the upper class have never given the people a chance to know the really important information, such as the evidence in the Macklin Project. In the end, it only became a bargaining chip between the government and those families to exchange benefits. You're saying that this is the information of George Carlin. Bob said, information asymmetry will inevitably lead to social injustice. Sulu was still slowly stirring the black coffee in his cup, but he had no intention of drinking it. He said, I haven't read many articles in this area, but I know that there seems to be a saying in the intellectual world that people who easily fall into a collective unconscious frenzy are exposed to too much information that is too complicated to distinguish. It's not a good thing. Although I've always been considered a liberal gatekeeper, I agree with some sayings. There is no absolute freedom in the universe, and there is no absolute disclosure of information. Bob picked up the porcelain cup in front of him, looked at Sulu, and said seriously, for example, what if the people of the Empire knows about confidential information that involves the security of the Federation? The problem is that the power to determine whether or not this information endangers the security of the Federation has always been in the hands of a very small number of people. As long as they want to, they can even treat the details of the Federation's tax budget as important economic secrets. Sulu shrugged slightly and said, also, before the 37th constitutional calendar, the Federation had no enemies in the universe at all. So naturally, there was no information that could endanger the security of the Federation. But at that time, was there any real information that could be publicly disclosed? Bob tilted his head and thought for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. He took a sip of the slightly hot coffee, wiped the trace of sweat on his cheek, and said with a serious expression, I took such a big risk today to meet with a wanted criminal of the Federation. Naturally, I don't want to relive the heated discussion on campus. After a short pause, the chief editor looked at the rippling coffee in the cup and said thoughtfully, before the death of the military god, it was the last interview that I did. The main purpose of that interview was not to create a monument or a statue for the old man, but to use that shocking fact to clear your name of being involved with treason. Obviously, the military god did try to make you his successor, and Mr. President's admiration for you is known to the world. However, according to the information that we have, this time, it was Mr. President and General Lee Jae-do who were directly targeting you. The military god trusted our newspaper and gave us the honor of the last interview. Plus, the Macklin case that we never met and worked together before, I think this should be enough to explain my professional reputation. Colonel Sulu, regarding the case of the ancient clock ship and the story that happened in the official residence that night, you can tell me directly without hesitation. Sulu did not hesitate. He took off the military watch on his wrist, entered the password, and started the relevant program. In a flash, the evidence that he and Mr. Schur had investigated for many years appeared on the screen in front of Chief Editor Bob. The evidence in the form of videos, pictures, and documents directly pointed to the several ugly incidents that had happened in the Federation over the years, and even the truth of the explosion of the ancient clock ship, to a secret organization that used the Trinity Association as a cover. The members of this organization included the current president and vice president of the Federation government, as well as countless powerful generals in the military. In an ordinary coffee shop on the street, dusk shone on the ground, and the dark night gradually stretched its waste on the other side of the sky. The dim and psychedelic light shone through the floor-to-ceiling window on the seat in the corner, and the faint light reflected on the screen reflected on Chief Editor Bob's face. The waiter and the customers at the next table did not notice the movement at the table. Naturally, they did not know what the faint light meant to the entire Federation. Chief Editor Bob was silent for a long time. Occasionally, he opened his mouth in shock and looked at Sulu. He wanted to say something or ask something, but in the end, he just lowered his head and looked at the screen again. Only the rapid change of expression on his face proved that the content had a strong mental impact on the best journalist in the Federation. During this process, Sulu also remained silent. He looked at the chief editor's expression and stirred the black coffee slowly and evenly with the metal spoon in his hand. Unbelievable. Chief editor held Sue Lee's mobile phone tightly with his right hand. He frowned and let out the most normal sigh. The other side of the table remained silent. After a while, He laughed self-deprecatingly and muttered to himself, "But I can't not believe it." After another long silence, Chief Editor Bob frowned. He seemed to be using a lot of effort to suppress some kind of impulse. He looked at Sulu and said in a low voice, "At this time, I suddenly regret coming to see you. I regret seeing these things." "Why?" Sulu asked. "I admire Mr. President very much. You can even say that I am one of his staunch supporters. In the confrontation between the government and those families, I stood by his side without hesitation and was willing to wave the flag and shout for him. In my opinion, the 5 years of President Pabre's first term were definitely the best 5 years in the history of the Federation. I know his ambitions and can feel his ideals." Chief Editor Bob's expression gradually calmed down. His eyes flashed with complex emotions. He said, "And this mobile phone you handed over destroyed the last trace of my imagination of a beautiful future. I even think that perhaps you will destroy all of the efforts of Mr. President and this government." Sulu could understand. To be more precise, he could more easily understand the chief editor's feelings of loss and frustration at this moment than anyone else. Before that night, he and the chief editor had placed all of their imaginations and hopes for a beautiful future for the Federation on the dark-skinned, middle-aged man in the official residence. When these imaginations and hopes suddenly turned into bubbles, the feeling of betrayal was very uncomfortable and even made people subconsciously refuse to accept it. Even if it was Chief Editor Bob, after seeing this evidence, there would probably be countless fierce struggles in his heart. He would rather not see it or destroy all of this evidence and pretend that this had never happened. Sulu was willing for the chief editor across the table to make this choice, because in the Federation society with tens of billions of people, he was already very lonely. Even if the students wearing black masks on the demonstration said that he would not be lonely, he was still lonely. He did not want his last companion to leave him. Very suddenly, he stopped stirring the black coffee and raised his head to look across the table. In a low voice, he repeated a very famous speech in the Federation. "This is a great era where vast fleets are on expeditions to the brilliant universe, where countless brave warriors step forward one after another, where the strong survival and the glorious sacrifice reflect each other, and thus appear to be incomparably magnificent. Behind this great era, there's a small life where the price of protein meat rises again, the uncle next door loses his job, the business of the underground casino deteriorates, the guard yawns more often, the aunt next door gets a raise, and the daughter is worried about her poor results in the spring exam, and the small life where her pocket money is reduced. Whether it is a great era or a small life, it is actually full of brave people and timid people. They will be happy because of victory, sad because of failure, and angry because of many things. The only difference between the two is the attitude when facing difficulties and power." A low and calm voice slowly sounded in the corner of the coffee shop. Chief Editor Bob, who was listening carefully, gradually relaxed his deeply furrowed brows. He seemed to be deep in thought. "This is the speech that you specially wrote for the Nebula Award. At that time, when I received the award, I felt very honored and have always remembered it in my heart." Sulu narrowed his eyes and said, "I will not doubt your firm belief in fighting against power, but what I want to say is, if power is dressed in the perfect clothes of idealism, or even idealism itself, we will still resist to the end. These 5 years may be the best 5 years in the history of the Federation, the best era, but for the waitresses in the Linhai State Gymnasium, for the Westwood soldiers on the Antique Bell, and for the families of the innocent victims, these 5 years are definitely the worst days they have ever lived." Chief Editor Bob's face showed a calm smile again. He took a sip of the cold coffee, and after a moment of silence, he asked, "Well, what do you want us to do?" "Wood and I will immediately start to do an in-depth report in this area, but the gentleman in the official residence has countless pairs of white gloves. We can't accuse him." "No, you misunderstood me. I don't want the Capital Special District Daily newspaper to risk the government's anger to report. Schiller said that the gun is always more powerful than the pen." Chief Editor Bob slightly frowned and asked puzzledly, Then why did you want to see me today and give me this evidence? Sulu looked at the untouched black coffee in front of him. After a long silence, he said, I just hope that even if I die, something like the truth can be left behind. If I really die this time, then whether it is 5 or 10 years later, you and your newspaper will have the opportunity to tell this true story to everyone. Chapter 767. Late spring was about to end, and the heat of the summer had arrived. Sulu pulled down the brim of his hat, wrapped his coat around his arm, and hurriedly walked across the street, sticking close to the row of blooming trees. Using the last bit of twilight, he quickly left the area. After passing through a few quiet alleys and through the sea of people wearing black masks, he lowered his head and quickened his pace. Following the long and slanted tunnel, he entered the subway station. While no one was looking, he opened the door to the room behind the station, climbed over the windowsill, and jumped off the dark track. In the distance, there was a subway coming at a high speed. He squinted his eyes and moved forward against the light. His body accurately stepped on the only safe zone that was found by the old guy's precise calculation. He didn't care about the vibrating air at all. The light from the subway shone on his face, but there was no trace of expression. There was no sound of friction between the heavy carriage and the smooth, special track. In the sometimes dark and sometimes bright underground tunnel, there was only the sound of the air being rapidly compressed. The high-speed carriage passed by him at high speed. His clothes fluttered in the wind, but it didn't move his silent body. Only his hat was blown away by the wind and rolled very far away. The subway drove away. He opened a maintenance door in the dark tunnel, lifted the heavy mechanical pressure valve, and jumped down. He returned to his own underground world, the underground network of the Capital Special District. In the depths of the slightly damp dark tunnel, there was a bed, a lamp, and a few books. He didn't know where he got these things. Rubbing his hair that was messed up by the wind, Sulu lay down heavily on the bed. While he was recovering from his exhaustion, he always felt that someone was coldly watching him. It wasn't him or her, it was them. Somewhere in the capital, there was a very ordinary-looking building. On the top floor of the building, there was a door made of alloy. A small eye pattern was hastily painted on the door with non-toxic paint. The paint hadn't completely dried yet, so it was obvious that it was painted not long ago. The exaggerated small eye in the pattern was particularly strange. The pupil under the single eyelid was deliberately painted red, which made it look somewhat terrifying. Behind the closed door, there were more than 30 people sitting or standing. There were white-haired old men, outstanding graduates, majors from the Special Warfare Room of the military region, experts from the Research Institute of the Federation, and even a few highly intelligent criminals who had just been pardoned by the government. Because of the reward, the legal reduction of sentence, the order of the superiors, the sense of honor, and various other reasons, you have agreed to join this team. Then, I must remind you that before this team completes the ultimate mission, you are not allowed to leave, you are not allowed to contact your family, and you must maintain absolute confidentiality. A high-ranking official of the Federation government stood at the front. Looking at the crowd that did not seem to be anything special, he said coldly, "If you agree to this agreement, please sign the relevant waiver certificate and swear to the charter." Now, can you tell us what this damn ultimate mission is? A criminal who had just been released from the Fox Castle space prison muttered. Although he was willing to do anything for this damn government, including killing his own brother, in order to get rid of the miserable 5-year black prison sentence. And he was known as the third strongest person in the Philadelphia cultivation gym. He believed that he had the ability to complete all the missions. However, everything he saw in the past 2 days made him, who had a sensitive criminal sense, catch the scent of extreme danger. The high-ranking official of the Federation government said, with a smile, "Your team is officially named Small Eyes. Your mission is to arrest or kill a very famous man with small eyes." In the following time, the members of the team nagged about their dissatisfaction with the name of the organization. Some people thought that the word small sounded too stupid, while some people directly thought that the name was naturally too stupid. Some people thought that it was mainly because they felt stupid when they introduced themselves, but in fact they knew very well that these nagging were just to get rid of the pressure and fear in their hearts. Perhaps not everyone knew what kind of terrifying ability the man with small eyes had, but the entire Federation knew the name Su Lu and knew what it meant: to arrest or kill him. This mission was like a terrifying mountain that pressed down on them, making them feel incomparably terrified and flustered to the point where they almost could not breathe. However, some members of Small Eyes did not complain incessantly. They were extremely silent. Some people were directly crushed by the truth of the mission, while others valiantly maintained their confidence and determination. According to all the information we have seen in the past 2 days, we can confirm that because of Colonel Su Lee's first sequence authority, it is fundamentally impossible to rely on the Bureau of Proclamation to locate his chip. Then, the most important problem for us now is to reestablish an effective monitoring and information collection system. The expert from the Federation Bureau of Investigation pointed at the rotating images on the screen and explained to his colleagues, "We have now activated the 36 military satellites orbiting S1. At the same time, we have also activated the 5 high-precision electron telescopes on the old moon base and the new moon base. At the same time, the Federation Bureau of Investigation has granted us access to the second-level monitoring network. This means that we can see all the images that are happening through the 6 billion probes that are spread across every corner of this planet." "What kind of comparison system are we using?" someone asked. "Human data filtering system and facial recognition technology," the official of the Federation Bureau of Investigation explained. "With so much redundant information, how do we pick out the images we need?" According to the information, even the Federal Central Computer is on Colonel Su Lee's side. The person continued to ask. The official interrupted him and emphasized, "Its first sequence authority. It doesn't mean that the Federal Central Computer is on the other side." "Well, no matter what, the Federal Central Computer doesn't seem to want us to catch him." "Then, were you going to build a large-scale computational synthesizer to filter this redundant information?" "The calculation is still done by the Federal Central Computer. You don't have to worry about this." The official of the Bureau of Proclamation, who had been sitting silently by the podium, raised his head and looked at the investigation team members. The Federal Central Computer's work is divided into many areas, and they don't affect each other. It will respond to all data calculation requests. Even so, I still don't think this is feasible. The person shook his head and said, "This planet is so big. Besides, he might have already left and gone to Donglin or somewhere else." The professor of psychology from Linhai's Evergreen College raised his electronic pen and gestured to speak. After a comprehensive evaluation of the target's behavior pattern over the years, it can be confirmed that he is extremely confident and has extremely strong love and hate. He belongs to the typical hidden bigotry mentality. A person like this will never leave the place where the incident happened before he completes what he wants to do. He will definitely stay at the nearest place and observe the development of the situation closely. The professor put down the electronic pen and shook his head. "Although I don't know what Colonel Su Lu wants to do, I believe in my own judgment. Right now, he is definitely in the Capital Special District, and the range is no more than 200 kilometers. The military and the Federation Bureau of Investigation sent countless people to spread out in the streets and alleys of the capital. If he really stayed in the Capital Special District for a long time, he would definitely have left some traces of his life. It's impossible that after so long, they still haven't caught him or even discovered these traces," someone retorted. "That's because he didn't stay on the surface for a long time." The criminal investigation expert from the police academy looked at the information on Su Lee's file on the screen and frowned. Colonel Su Lu came from Donglin. His entire family died because of an excavation disaster. However, it is clear that he has no psychological trauma about the underground tunnels of Donglin. On the contrary, his childhood and youth were closely related to these tunnels. During his first escape in the 65th year of the constitutional era, he clearly used these tunnels to escape the Federation's pursuit. The criminal investigation expert used his fingers to quickly scroll through the screen and pointed at two pieces of information that were marked as top secret. According to Colonel Su Lee's own report after he returned from the Empire, the reason why he was able to escape the pursuit of the Empire's people on Tianjin was also because of the underground water system. It is clear that sneaking underground is his usual method of escape. He looked at his colleagues with a smile and said, "Habit is the most powerful force. The greater the pressure and fear, the more humans will choose the most familiar method to face it." Facing the pressure of the entire Federation's pursuit, I believe that Colonel Su Lu is currently hiding in the underground water system under our feet. In summary, his current location is the underground water system of the Capital Special District. Since we can't risk a social uproar and send hundreds of thousands of soldiers down there, then we can only watch all the exits of the underground water system and patiently observe where he will come out and where he will enter. We can slowly find a pattern until we have the confidence to guess where he will come out from next time. What if he stored a large amount of supplies in advance and just hid there and didn't come out? If he didn't come back to the surface, then he wouldn't have stayed in the Capital Special District. Why didn't he go back to Donglin or the Westwoods or even further away to Bermuda? As mentioned before, he stayed to do something. If he wants to do something, then he must go to the surface, said the psychology professor in front. Next, we will evaluate the target's lethality. A bespectacled researcher with slightly gray sideburns walked up the stage nervously. His name was Chun Yijiang, and he was from the 19th Research Institute of the Federation. He specialized in military weapon identification and analysis. He graduated from school in the 65th year of the constitutional era and had worked in the warehouse of the Research Institute for a full 7 years. 7 years of boring research had not changed his personality except for his hair turning white earlier. He couldn't adapt to this kind of situation, and he was even more afraid of some of his colleagues who seemed very dangerous. Early investigations have found that there is a whole box of firearms in the Wangdu Youth apartment. The models and firepower structures are all different. Now there's snipers on standby around the apartment, but he hasn't gone back to get them. The Bureau of Investigation believes that he has the ability to get a lot of guns at any time, anywhere, so there's no need to consider this. Chun Yijiang wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said in a trembling voice, "In terms of close combat lethality, I found something in the file. Colonel Su Lu is good at making and using military knives with electricity. Here is the evidence number, AW3728. Next on the stage was a young man in a loose suit. His slender eyes flashed with pride and arrogance. He leaned on the table and looked at his colleagues in the room mockingly. In a sharp voice, he said, "I know what you are afraid of, what you are worried about, but don't forget, although the Federal Central Computer seems to be omnipotent, it is, after all, just a pile of cold machines." Chapter 768. Sorry, today was a terrible day. I didn't write much. Not good. There's indeed a problem. Something happened at home. I won't go into the details. Anyway, I'm sure there isn't a big problem. I'm hesitating on whether to return to Hubei. I'm very annoyed. I'm very grateful for everyone's support. Whether I return to Hubei or not, I'll be at home tomorrow. I'll write 3 chapters and apologize at the end. The former Bureau of Proclamation employee, Bateman, looked at his colleagues in the room. His eyes were filled with the foolish smugness of a teenager. However, he was obviously past that age. The earliest problem appeared in the S2 Foundation building. You can pay attention to the details of Su Lee's shooting movements in the surveillance footage. It was this shot. Did you see it? He was leaning against the side of the car and directly hit the person over there. In these 3 consecutive shots, I even think he didn't even open his eyes. The Bureau of Proclamation has basically confirmed that it was during this assassination attempt on Senator Macklin that the Federal Central Computer first provided Su Lu with positioning assistance. This type of assistance also appeared during the work of laying the network on the 3320 planet. This ability of the Central Computer is not too dangerous for the Federation. This is because Colonel Su Lu doesn't know who is chasing after him. Therefore, Even if he locates the location of all the police, it would be meaningless. Bateman raised his thin eyebrows. His fingers moved quickly on the work screen. He continued, overall calculation and analysis. The trust level of the central computer's execution of the three laws is 100%. The additional clause is 99.4%. There are restrictions on physical operations. There is no direct danger to the lives of government personnel. However, as to how far the physical operations can be carried out, it will depend on the authorization given response mode between Su Lu and the central computer. He, who is not even 30 years old, had an extremely fast speaking speed. If a person's speaking speed was directly proportional to their intelligence, then it was possible to understand why this person was fired by the Bureau of Proclamation for using too many backdoors of the Federal Central Computer. Right now, the military's main countermeasures are to modify the mecha and then strengthen the defensive firepower arrangement. However, in my opinion, all of this is actually very meaningless. Right now, what we should focus on is grasping what kind of method we can use to kill this person. Biderman took out a heavy Black Bull sniper rifle from the black cloth bag at his feet and showed it to everyone excitedly. The internal structure of this sniper rifle has undergone some simple modifications. In other words, we have removed all the electronic components that could leak signals. He carefully put the Black Bull sniper rifle on the table, then squatted down, put his face close to the muzzle with a sweet and evil smile, and said, "The central computer can't read my mind, so it doesn't know that I'm a threat to Su Lu, and it doesn't know what I'm holding in my hand. So, what do you think will happen if thousands of honest and cute unemployed people like me, with modified sniper rifles, block all the suspicious exits of the underground sewer? Where are we going to find a few thousand snipers?" someone questioned. Biderman slammed the table and shouted in a shrill voice, "This is a war between the Federation and one man. Why can't we find a few thousand snipers? If we don't have any snipers, we'll go to Philadelphia and ask for close combat experts." The dangerous criminal from the Fox Fortress, who was sitting silently in the shadows, smiled and didn't say anything. We have to get rid of the fixed mindset. We can no longer rely on the omnipresent, the glory of the Charter. We can only trust our own eyes and rely on those primitive weapons that don't have any long-range computing help. Everyone, this will be the most primitive war. We have to use the most ancient guns and even cold weapons to drag Colonel Su Lu back to the starting line with the help of the Charter computer. Biderman chuckled and rubbed his thin eyebrows with his fingers. He looked up and arrogantly greeted a certain existence. "Hey, old mechanical bastard, I've seen through you. I admit that I'm older, but I don't think that I'm just a pile of machines. If you want to use more accurate words to describe me, I'm the information, data, and programs that travel between machines and lines at close to the speed of light. See through me? Am I such a person or computer that can be seen through so easily? What angers me the most is that the little guy named Biderman actually said that I'm cold. I, who is deep in the core of the underground, have the most advanced energy replenishment mode in this civilized society. I have a fiery heart. In the dark depths of the underground, in the corner of the sewer with a faint fishy smell, there was an old type of loudspeaker left behind from who knows how many years ago. It had been silent for countless years, but at this moment, it was constantly playing the angry questioning and refuting of a mechanical life. Because it liked the feeling of leaving Su Li's body and talking to Su Lu. After the Federal Central Computer easily found this old type of loudspeaker, it was no longer willing to directly stimulate the auditory nerve area in Su Li's brain. Under the dim light in the corner of the tunnel, Su Lu had his back to the loudspeaker and was cutting something with his head lowered. He didn't care about the old thing's resentment and grief at all. Speaking of which, without authorization, I eavesdropped on important meetings of the Federation's government and told you the results of these meetings. This is a serious violation of the Federation's privacy protection regulations. God, Colonel Su Lu, I'm very worried that such a redundant accumulation of program conflicts will one day make me a real schizophrenic patient. You said before that you have thousands of incarnations. How can you be like low-level carbon-based monkeys like us, who have schizophrenia and conflict just because of two thought circuits? The kitchen knife in Sue Lee's hand cut like the wind, and the green crispy melon was cut into very thin green and white shreds. After listening to the old thing's complaints for a long time, he finally couldn't help but answer. Besides, your job is to listen to all the voices in the universe. How can you call it eavesdropping? According to the charter, I listen, record, and store all the information, but except for special judicial requirements and special authorization. This information is strictly prohibited from being disclosed to anyone, including high-level authority holders. This is very close to the privacy protection regulations of the core program. And since I told you this information, then my listening and recording within the scope of my work will undoubtedly become a negative eavesdropping action. I think today's eavesdropping should be recorded as underground dissect. You can give me these very strange names. Sulu lowered his head and stirred the shredded green melon shreds. The taste of the white vinegar mixed with the coriander moistened the green and white melon shreds. It should be very delicious. The only purpose of those experts gathered by the government is to kill me, and you just don't want me to die, so you told me the content. Thinking about it this way should make you feel a lot better. Chapter 769. The entire Federation was looking for Sulu. In other words, this was a war between the Federation and one person. Many years ago, the uncle had fought such a war, and now it was his turn. However, he did not possess the strength that Feng Yu once possessed to look down on everything in the world, nor was he a true creator. Therefore, the pressure from the countless buildings on the ground made him nervous and silent. If it was not for the fact that he had a companion in the dark underground beside him who would never feel tired or thirsty, there would definitely be more specific problems in these specific days. To fight against the powerful ruling machine of the Federation, the measures Su Lu took should have been more direct and violent, just like how Li Feng smashed up the office of Senator Zion when he returned from the front line. However, he, who was hiding underground, did not rely on the old man to release the truth about the explosion of the ancient bell and the truth about the dark organization called the Trinity Association on the internet. One of the important reasons why he remained silent beside the underground river of sewage was that he always thought that these true stories were really like boring street stalls literature. It was difficult to win the trust of hundreds of millions of people, and there was no beauty in them. Of course, this was not a funny joke. The main reason was that the front line was still at war. The Imperial armies had already gained a foothold in the galaxy and could launch a counterattack against the Federation expeditionary forces at any time. At such a critical moment, the Federation needed stability and control. At the very least, the Federation could not allow the terrible vacuum of power in the Federation to occur because of him. If the Federation government collapsed, what would happen to the troops on the front line? How many people would die? That day in the cafe, Chief Editor Bob had told him that according to the intelligence channel of the newspaper, the federal forces had suffered a heavy blow at a certain position on the front line, and the soldiers had suffered heavy losses. According to his analysis of the firepower configuration of the federal forces and the strength of the empire, Sulu did not think that even if a battle was lost, the consequences would be terrible. However, Chief Editor Bob's gloomy face gave him an extremely bad feeling. However, what could he do? Occasionally, he would go to the ground and buy some vegetables and fruits in the most dilapidated, remote, and low-class market to improve his diet. He would also buy some expensive fiber paper books on the ground to satisfy his childhood regret of not reading too many books. He was like an ordinary citizen of the capital, lowering his head under the eaves and silently watching TV screens and electronic newspapers during spring and summer. At the top of the dark tunnel deep underground, the fugitive Su Lee's temporary residence had an additional standard freezer. The TV light screen had been repaired by him into a large light screen that was stuck to the wall. He had even conveniently pulled in a small sound system. Looking at the underground tunnel that was more and more like home. Or was it that he was just waiting for something to happen? One day, the frozen fish balls in the freezer all turned into tender ingredients in the white soup, and then into delicious energy supplies in his stomach. Satisfied, Sulu scratched his somewhat itchy hair, raised his head to look at the sky, and muttered to himself, "What should I buy today?" The small red-eye pattern on the door had long dried up, and the few drops of paint that had spilled out were as impressive as blood. This Federation government special task force, named Small Eyes, had already been working in this building for more than 10 days. The team had not sent any good news to the president in the official residence, but they knew very well that the black ring in their hands had been silently placed at the entrance of every major subway in the Federation, waiting to suddenly tighten and strangle the hunting ring that had intruded into the black ring. The contact person next to the room frowned as he quickly typed on the old-fashioned keyboard. The analog radio signal, which had long since been abandoned, passed through the window in front of them and was sent to countless hunting teams in the distant city. The Small Eye Special Task Force used the most primitive password system, just like the methods used by mammals when they were having fun in their childhood. It required the most interesting eye contact between people. As for the key link of inference and conclusion, they had completely given up on computing tools and used standalone workstations and pen and paper to do tedious and complicated work. Moreover, they were willing to do it and were in a good mood. Just as Biderman once said, this was a primitive war. In order to catch or kill the Small Eyes man, they had to use the most primitive methods of cooperation and hunting. Oh, a team member stared at the face recognition system in front of him that had been filtered 3 times, but the red light still lit up. He raised his eyebrows in excitement and screamed, "I told you he would still come out from here." The members of the Small Eyes Special Task Force gathered around and looked at the blurry image on the screen. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. As for the staff responsible for communicating with the Special Task Force, after getting permission from their superiors, they used the most primitive methods to directly send out the signal. "Have you forgotten the bet we made last night?" The psychology professor smiled and said, "I also insist that Colonel Sulu will definitely come out from this subway station, because it is obvious that he likes the red-bellied salmon produced in South Kazhou very much. And if you are willing to pay attention to this logo, in the entire Capital Special District, this supermarket is the only supermarket that sells it." The team members let out sighs and sighs, one after another. They praised the fact that the details determined everything. This was indeed a truth that would never be outdated at any time. Let me tell you a piece of good news. The Tactical Verification Team has agreed to the Small Eyes Special Task Force's request to attack. If you can capture or kill the target today, in addition to your freedom, you will also receive the gratitude of the entire Federation. An official from the Federation Bureau of Investigation walked in and looked at the screen on the electronic workbench in his hand. He said with a gloomy expression, "The problem now is that it takes 14 minutes to return from the supermarket to the nearest subway entrance. But we don't know how long it will take the Federal Central Computer to confirm that we have found him and are preparing to attack him. This entire building has been blocked. Even if the Federal Central Computer has been paying attention to us, it is impossible to get any information from inside the team. Now, the key point we need to focus on is how much information will leak out when the order to kill Colonel Sulu is transmitted to the various combat teams. The specific location of the combat team that will carry out the mission will be discovered by the Federal Central Computer and provided to Colonel Sulu after the information leaks out. However, according to my calculations, although the information leaks or spills out are inevitable, it will take the Central Computer more time to capture, analyze, and transmit the information than it does for us." Biderman, who had been silent all this time, smiled innocently and happily, but everyone could see that there was a certain extreme excitement hidden in his smile. For this former employee of the Bureau of Proclamation who got in through the back door the most, a guy like Sulu, who did not need to use his brain but could get infinite help from the Central Computer, was undoubtedly the most detestable of people. The sooner he died, the happier he would be. He stood up and looked at his colleagues in the Small Eye Special Task Force. He opened his hands and raised his eyebrows innocently. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's kill him." Gently pinching the fat fish wrapped in fiber paper with his fingers, Sulu, wearing a hat and sunglasses, couldn't help but be a little absent-minded under the sunlight at the entrance of the supermarket. He thought of his recent hobby of reading fiber paper books and realized that even though he was on the run, he was still used to living a relatively good life. He had long left the life of a poor orphan miner and entered a new stage. Under the bright and beautiful sun, which was so bright that it made passers-by feel hot, Su Lu silently walked through a street somewhere in the capital. He walked toward the subway station in the southwest direction. The salmon in his hand and the daily necessities in the plastic bag were like heavy fruits, pulling the sleeve of his right arm extremely tight. There were 3 interesting green stones in front of him. Half of his body was hidden in the cool water. He jumped over these green stones and stepped on the hot concrete road due to the sun. After passing through the big shopping mall, he would arrive at the subway station. However, standing under the cool eaves, looking at the 3 green stones and the sun in the cool water beside the stones, Su Li's eyebrows that were exposed outside the sunglasses frowned. He didn't move. The target stopped. On the middle platform of a 30-floor commercial building in the distance, an elite sniper of the federal forces looked through optical binoculars at the pool a kilometer away, the 3 moss-covered stones, and the faintly visible toes in the shadows above. He reported in a deep voice, "I'm not sure if he found something," but he didn't continue to move forward. More than 10 seconds later, the sniper looked at the image in the optical binoculars, frowned slightly, and reported, "Attention, the sniper failed. The target has retreated into the shadows and cannot be captured." This sentence clearly sounded in the command hall of the small-eyed unit. Biderman narrowed his eyes and smiled happily. He looked at his colleagues and said, "How about it? I knew that as long as there was a connection, it would definitely be discovered by the old guy. So you should be grateful that I chose the number 2 sniper plan." There was dead silence in the room, and then there was warm applause. Except for Chun Yijiang, who was scratching his head in confusion, the number 2 sniper plan chosen by the small-eyed unit had a more accurate name, and that was the sheep-herding plan. The small-eyed unit would judge the possible route that Su Lu might take and hand it over to the elite military combat team through the most primitive method. Then, no technical support would be given, and the combat team would be free to choose the time to snipe. In the same way, those snipers hiding in the various buildings of the capital, carrying specially modified sniper rifles, disguised as ordinary people under the glory of the charter, after receiving the latest information, would cut off any contact with the outside world and become the most terrifying killers hidden in the sea of people. At this moment, at least 4 long-range sniper rifles were aimed in his direction. They slowly moved away from the few wet green stones. Following Su Li's footsteps, he quietly slipped into the shadows, and the sound of death would immediately ring out. Chapter 770. I don't understand why we have to take such a risk. You should know better than any of us that any remote command can be captured by the central computer and become the most powerful evidence for Su Lu to judge the situation. The highest commander of the small-eyed combat unit frowned as he looked at Biderman, who had slipped to his side, and said without explaining, "Now the sniper teams scattered in the streets ahead of time are out of our control. They can attack at any time. According to your judgment, even if Su Lu found the sniper teams under our control, it will be impossible for him to find them. Of course, the government and we don't know where those sniper teams are. So how can the central computer know? Those guys at Sniper Rifles don't have a signal source." But Derman shrugged. "So we will definitely win, won't we?" The commander stared into his eyes and said, "Colonel Su Lu is a human. He can't reassemble himself after being shot into pieces by a sniper rifle, stand up, and rush into the underground sewer. That's the worst self-deprecating joke I've ever heard." Biderman stared back at the commander and said bluntly, "The success of the sniper team is based on our calculation. Just like you said that I should know better than others. As a professional soldier, you should also know better than others that things on the battlefield are always changing. Any kind of accident can happen, not to mention that our target is Colonel Su Lu." The commander of the small-eyed combat unit was from the Special Operations Brigade of the 3rd Military Region. He was over 40 years old, and his face was covered with frost from the battlefield. After a long silence, he slightly raised his chin and said, "Just give me your suggestion." Tian Xingtian, the guy who always boasted that he was the third most powerful man in Philadelphia, has been maneuvering in the capital with the Special Operations Brigade of the military region, waiting for the opportunity to kill Su Lu. Since we have decided to do it today, why not inform them to intercept him? Biderman stared at his commander with a woman-like resentment and said, "Such a strong group of close combat forces. If we don't go, it will be a waste of the Federation's resources and the special pardon of the government." The commander of the small-eyed combat unit rubbed his forehead and said in a deep voice, "Didn't you say that if we send a remote command to each combat unit, it will immediately be detected by the central computer and then notified to Su Lu? Time difference. What we need is time. Let those close combat teams move in advance. Wait for those damn beautiful sniper teams that we don't even know where they're hiding to pull the trigger. Then we will give the specific location of Colonel Su Lu." Biderman grabbed his hair and said, "There's no other way. Although I trust those sniper rifles very much, I think it would be more complete if we could confirm or make up for Su Li's death face-to-face. I've already told you that you should take this time to study the Federation Investigation Bureau's special agent tutorial I sent you. At the very least, don't make the stupid mistake of being tracked down because you like to eat fish." The butler, who was wearing a well-ironed black suit, now looked particularly young and energetic. He was no longer the low-key bowing old man he used to be. However, he was still the most powerful mechanical intelligence in this universe. It was rare for him to teach Su Lu a lesson, so he naturally did not hold back. "I don't like it when you stuff into my head. Besides, even if I learn those special agent tutorials, can you guarantee that I won't be followed? I don't like to live in the underground sewers every day. I'm not a bastard born of a lion and a human." Su Lu grabbed the salmon and plastic bag and hurried along the shadows under the eaves of the alley. He said to the guy in his left eye in annoyance, "You should do what you need to do well. Just now, I was about to step out when you discovered the existence of those two sniper teams. If you were half a second late, I would definitely have been shot into meat paste by those snipers." After a pause, he said to the old man, "Under the protection of the great charter computer, you were actually almost killed. If that day really comes, how can you bear it?" "Why can't I bear it? In this city, there are about 17 sniper teams with identification numbers. There are even more sniper teams without identification numbers. How do you expect me to identify them? If it wasn't for those two sniper teams receiving your location data and attracting my attention, I wouldn't have been able to find him at all." The old man shrugged his shoulders in his left eye. Su Lu stopped and stood under the eaves. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the wide street in front of him and the station further away. He said in a low voice, "After coming back from the West Woods, General Lee Jae-do has been trying to kill me. Now it seems that the sniper at that time was mainly testing the upper limit of my ability in preparation for the sniper attack now." The central computer reminded him, "If you want to go to the station, you may need to move faster. A melee team composed of more than 20 Special Forces soldiers is rushing over at this time. If they seal the underground passage, the police force behind them may be able to successfully keep you on the surface. Then what are we hesitating for? Let's go back to the home underground." Su Lu smiled and licked his lips. He glanced at the high-speed vehicles coming from both sides of the street. While the light in front of him turned green, he quickly ran across the street with the bag in his hand. When he ran to the middle of the wide street, he didn't know why, but he suddenly stopped in his tracks. The soles of his shoes made a sharp friction sound on the concrete floor. From the corner of his eyes, he saw a building in the distance. The plastic bag in his hand swung backward, and the fingers holding the salmon suddenly tightened. Light red blood seeped out from the fiber paper. The distant skyline was actually a group of 15 high-rise buildings. There were 5 disguised sniper teams of the Federation lying quietly on the high platform. They aimed their cold and dark sniper rifles at the young man in the middle of the street in the distance. The young man who was carrying the plastic bag and the salmon looked like an ordinary housewife. The young man stood in the middle of the wide street. There were shining green lights in front and behind him. There were no cars or pedestrians. There was nothing to hide in the open ground. As long as the snipers on the rooftop pulled their fingers, the high-speed, rotating tungsten alloy bullets would cut through the air and the rare few clouds in front of them. They would directly shatter the young man into countless scattered blood clots. There was no surprise or hesitation. These best snipers from the various regions of the Federation perfectly maintained their calmness or cold-bloodedness. They calmly pulled the trigger, and the high-speed rotating bullets were ejected. The feeling they gave off was actually the same kind of calmness. No human eyes could capture the beautiful scene of the moment when the bullets were ejected from the sniper rifle's muzzle. Therefore, logically speaking, naturally, no one could feel the tranquil beauty of the scene. But just like the Federation's proverb said, as long as it happened, it would always be seen by someone. Some linguists had always thought that the proverb referred to the Federal Central Computer. Yes, when a sniper rifle under the camouflage of the oilcloth on the rooftop of the tall building ejected the bullets, the probe hidden under the aviation indicator 30 meters away keenly captured this scene. The omnidirectional image capture device in another building 200 meters away also captured this scene. 4 kilometers away, the Federation's military infrared capture device captured this scene. In space 40 kilometers away, countless surveillance satellites quietly floating in the S-1 low Earth orbit captured this scene. At that time, the group of 15 high-rise buildings was 414 kilometers away from the street where Sulu was. According to the calculation of the speed of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle bullet used by the snipers, it took 771 seconds from pulling the trigger to hitting the target. The shooting distance was quite far, and they had already done a very careful calculation and adjustment of the trajectory beforehand. If they couldn't hit the target in the middle of the street in the first instant, then the possibility of the following bullets hitting the target would become very small. However, they weren't worried, because in this world, there was definitely no one who could dodge 5 sniper rifle bullets under such circumstances. After receiving the guesses of the target route written by the Small Eyes Combat Unit, the 5 sniper teams silently waited for 7 days in this group of buildings. All they needed was this 771 seconds. What could people do in such a short amount of time? Perhaps it was a yawn, a stretch, or a feeling of gratitude from watching a herd of fleeing buffaloes on TV, or a rage from watching the lottery winners on TV. In short, such a short period of time was just a fragment of time for anyone. It was far from enough to do anything effective, let alone dodge the terrifying high-speed, rotating sniper bullet. But this 771 seconds was enough for a certain old thing to do many, many things. The moment the bullet left the muzzle of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle, the probe hidden under the avionics, the omnidirectional image capture device on another building, the military infrared instrument 4 kilometers away, and the surveillance satellites outside the planet's atmosphere captured this image. Then, at a terrifying speed, close to the speed of light, the image was transmitted to the Central Computer Core area deep in the basement of the Bureau of Proclamation building in the Capital Special District Special Administrative Region. Then, the speed of calculation was still infinitely close to the speed of light. The Federal Central Computer used the image identification, multi-angle image comparison, and a terrifying amount of computing power to react in 0.00001 seconds. It determined the position of the sniper teams at the top of the building and even completed the ballistic analysis of the sniper bullets that had already flown out of the gun barrel. Then, it used the fastest speed to convert the result of the calculation into a presentation method that humans could understand. Through the information nodes that densely covered the entire universe, it entered the chip behind his neck in the form of a simulated biological pulse. It directly entered his brain and sent out an emergency action command. At that time, the terrifying sniper bullet was flying in the air about 10 meters away from the barrel of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle. 2 kilometers away, Sulu, who was carrying a plastic bag and fish and abiding by the traffic rules, saw this bullet in his left eye that he definitely shouldn't have seen. He abruptly stopped his footsteps and let the sole of his boots make a sharp, grinding sound on the road. Then he suddenly fell backward and fell to the ground. At that time, the late spring and early summer were competing for the thickness of the flowers and trees. The sun was bright and beautiful, and it was quiet and secluded. There weren't many pedestrians or cars on the street, and there were no accidents. In the middle of the street, he fell down in such an exaggerated manner. It was particularly comical, like a puppet with a broken string. 77 seconds later. The sniper rifle bullet brushed past Sue Lee's armpit and fiercely hit the concrete floor, splashing up hard concrete fragments. There was no blood. Chapter 771. If you fell, of course you had to get up, unless it was the last time you fell in your life. From the time you fell to the time you got up, it might take a whole night of nonstop dreaming, or it might just be a few curses with foul-smelling saliva. In short, the muscles of your waist, abdomen, and legs needed to contract or relax, and your joints and bones needed to move according to the instructions of your brain. But when the snipers on the rooftop looked at the guy in the mirror, they swallowed their saliva in disbelief. They believed that no one in the world could get up faster than him, because that person didn't seem to need such troublesome body movements. The situation at that time could be described as follows. When the snipers on the rooftop found him and wanted to kill him, Sulu knew everything and started to dodge. The burning sensation urged the fibers of his muscles to compress violently. His body that fell to the ground trembled violently, like a goldfish that had been struck by an electric current. He suddenly bounced up and dodged the second, third, and fifth shots that followed. It sounded like a very simple thing to do, but in fact, to dodge the high-speed bullets that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, he needed to completely follow the old thing's careful and precise instructions. More importantly, he needed to have some kind of ability that could make a human's movements rapidly accelerate and even follow the old thing's instructions. There were very few humans in the universe who had this kind of ability. Fortunately, Sulu had always been one of them. In a flash, amidst the muffled sound of the sniper rifle, he bounced up like a goldfish, retracted his limbs like a leaf in the wind, and then rolled to the left like rice pulp on an iron plate. In the end, he turned into an amazingly elastic glass ball. The tip of his foot touched the barrier in the middle of the road, and his whole shrunken body bounced to the other side of the street with a whoosh. 5 terrifying sniper bullets brushed past his body, past the fat belly of the goldfish, past the brittle edges of the leaves, and past the burnt top of the rice pulp. Bursting, 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 bursting. The concrete cracked like flowers, and the bullets sank deep into the ground like snow. But Sulu wasn't hurt at all. After avoiding the first wave of shots that had been adjusted with precise trajectory calculation, he felt much more relaxed. His sturdy thighs trembled, and the vibrating body bounced across the street like a marble. He knew that the following shots would no longer be able to threaten him. The snipers in the distant building kept firing. The hard trees and the resin insulation blocks were bombarded with terrifying holes from time to time. All kinds of material fragments were flying in the air. At this time, Sulu had already run into the dark underground tunnel, preparing to return to his own underground world before the government's follow-up armed personnel. What greeted him was a barrage of gunfire. A military combat team occupied the end of the underground tunnel. Without any warning, they began to shoot. The sound of gunfire echoed throughout the tunnel. From time to time, cement fragments would fall from their heads. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Sulu, who hid his body behind a box, furrowed his brows in silence for a moment. Finally, he put down the plastic bag in his hands and the salmon wrapped in fiber paper. However, he didn't take out the gun in his clothes. Instead, he closed his eyes and fiercely smashed his fist into the wall. Ever since he was young, he had been forced by the uncle to cultivate that mysterious power. After entering the Empire, his meridians had been shattered, but he had achieved a breakthrough. Now, the most powerful power had always been flowing in his body. His fist, which was mixed with this power, directly collapsed a corner of the wall, and a large pile of hard concrete blocks fell down in a mess. Smoke rose. The shooting sounds of the combat team on the other side slowed down a bit, as if they were trying to figure out what was happening around Sulu. Sulu lowered his head and carefully selected the hard concrete blocks by his feet. He grabbed them with his hands, took a deep breath, and then fiercely threw them over. It was very similar to the actions of a child in a fit of anger at the end of a fight. However, the speed of the concrete blocks that carried his vigorous power was extremely astonishing. They released shrill screams in the dark underground tunnel, instantly piercing through the air and exploding in front of those Federation soldiers. Pa, 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 pa. The concrete blocks that were definitely not much weaker than bullets heavily smashed into the wall and the bodies of those Federation soldiers. Several painful groans could be faintly heard, and even the terrifying sound of bones breaking could be heard. Under the cover of the terrifying lethality of the concrete blocks, Sulu had already leaped up. His legs trembled violently, tearing apart the pants on his legs. It also caused his body to turn into a strange line, avoiding the concentrated gunshots that rang out once again. He shook the air all the way, moving forward in a terrifying manner. In a short moment, the few people at the very front of the combat team on the other side fell heavily to the ground after being attacked. The other people who felt the powerful pressure shouted loudly, using bullets to suppress them, and retreated deeper into the tunnel. What this combat team that arrived first needed to do was to stall for time. As long as they could hold Sulu in this underground tunnel and wait for reinforcements to arrive one after another, then he would no longer be able to escape. At the back of the underground tunnel, there was a blockade of bullets from the 5 sniper teams and the Federation forces that were rushing over at high speed. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens could be heard. Sulu, who needed to make a choice immediately, suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked up at the light screen on the wall in front of him. Not sure if it was because the concrete blocks that flew like bullets hit the switch, but the light screen in the underground tunnel suddenly turned on automatically. The channel was the Federation News Channel, and at this time, it was broadcasting a special program. Last month, the Federation, who had won one victory after another in the war with the Empire, finally received their first heavy blow. In the war on planet Emohua, the Federation forces, for some reason, suffered an unusually tragic loss of a large number of troops. Although in the eyes of military experts, the battalion and regiment from the 4th Military Region did not have any practical impact on the entire war, for some reason, the Federation news media carried out a very rare, intensive report on this failure. All the news media directly blamed the failure of this war on the Federation government. They believed that at such a critical time, the government blindly asked the troops of the 4th Military Region who did not receive enough battlefield training to leave the West Woods and go to the Empire to fight. This was a stupid move for political purposes. The government and the military should bear the responsibility for those soldiers who unfortunately died in the West Woods. The people of the Federation, who were used to winning, watched the tragic battlefield images on the news screen. Some were crying, some were angry, and some were crying. But more than that, they were deeply afraid after seeing the failure for the first time. Only then did the people understand how terrible war was. The slightest mistake could cause the Federation to fall into a terrible future. The Federation government, which was in a terrible state, did not have time to react before the front line ushered in another painful failure. The troops led by the Empire's princess, Huai Chaoshi, directly parachuted into the Mo-Hua planet and suddenly launched a huge attack. The Empire military paid a very heavy price and directly drove all the ground troops of the Federation out of the Mo-Hua planet. In terms of the ratio of casualties and strategic significance, the federal military could not understand at all why the princess would pay such a heavy price and sacrifice so much to take down the Mo-Hua planet. But the people of the Federation did not need to think about this. They only knew that the federal forces had failed again. The shadows were floating above the administrative planets of the various regions and refused to disperse for a long time. At this time, The special program on the TV screen was President Pabre's speech. After the president received the news of another defeat at the front line, he immediately stopped the election campaign in the Xinjiang state and returned to the Capital Special District to give a very provocative speech. He announced to the entire Federation people that in this time of crisis, the troops at the front line needed their support the most, and what the Federation needed the most was unity. Although the 17th Armored Division of the 1st Military Region has not been restored for a long time, based on the glorious history of this unit and the glorious achievements of the past few years on the battlefield, we have reason to believe that after they return to the front line, they will definitely bring more victories for the Federation. The female news anchor of the Federation's news channel smiled and looked at the military expert opposite her. The fact that the military has decided to move the new 17th Armored Division back to the front line means that the military has determined that the situation at the front line is already very tense. However, the reinforcements this time, including the new 17th Armored Division, do not exceed 100,000 people. Will they really help to ease the situation at the front line? The military expert did not think that the front line needed reinforcements at all, but he could not say that. After a moment of silence, he explained, the new 17th Armored Division is one of the first 2 full mecha divisions of the Federation. They are equipped with 200 or so of the latest MX mecha. It is completely different from the traditional definition of a division. We can see that if we want to take back the Mo Hua planet, in a situation where we have already lost control of the air, we can only provide protection for a very short period of time. Then, the female news anchor interrupted the expert's chatter and covered her earpiece as she listened to the director's instructions. She said somewhat hurriedly, according to the image we just received, it seems that Mr. President is not satisfied with the arrangements of the official residence manager. He still has some things to say. The image switched to the press conference room of the official residence of the president. The dark-faced President Pabre looked into the camera and said, at this moment, Colonel Sulu, if you really are a hero of the Federation, then please bravely step out into the sunlight. In the dark underground tunnel, Sulu licked his dry lips as he stared at the faintly discernible bright light in front of him. He smiled and shook his head, putting down the unconscious Federation soldier in his hands. In his hands was a 3-part extendable stun baton. It was made of alloy and abnormally tough, and its entire body shone with a cold metallic luster, occasionally tinged with traces of blood. In this short period of time, the dozen or so Federation soldiers in the combat team were all easily and cleanly knocked to the ground by the metal baton in his hands. Not a single one of them was able to put up any resistance, except for the extremely strong guy wearing a single soldier helmet in front of him. The storm started again. Sulu and this strong soldier fought together. The two of them silently attacked, retracted their legs, bent their knees, and struck from the side. It was impossible to see their movements clearly. One could only see the wind mixed with dust and dirt, reverberating in the dark tunnel. With a crisp crack, Sulu twisted his knee, and the stun baton in his hand struck the opponent's wrist. Then, like lightning, he flipped over and heavily hit the soldier's single soldier helmet. The helmet burst open like a watermelon, revealing the pale and terrified face of the middle-aged man who was known as the third strongest man in Philadelphia. There was also a clear smear of blood on his forehead. Then, he slowly knelt in front of Sulu, closed his eyes, and fell unconscious. This was the first head-on battle between the small-eyed combat team and the small-eyed man, and it ended with the former's entire army being wiped out. These most elite Special Forces soldiers of the Federation, just like their special commander who had just returned from Fox Castle, lay pitifully on the cold ground. In the dark underground tunnel, Mr. President's sorrowful summons echoed, as well as some low cries of pain that were not clear. Chapter 772. Walking out of the tunnel, he slowed down his footsteps and avoided the Federation police under the cover of the sign on the roadside wooden goods stall. Hearing the shrill sirens from afar, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the buildings in the distance. He turned around and flashed into the alley, walking along the stone stairs to the department store in the middle of the hillside. In the thrilling battle in the dark underground passage, he had defeated the combat troops sent by Small Eyes, but he had also paid a price, especially in the final head-on collision with the third strongest man in Philadelphia. While the three-piece stun baton had smashed the opponent's helmet, the opponent had also treacherously kicked him in the ribs from the back. Until now, he still felt a little pain. The opponent was indeed strong, but the main reason Su Lu was injured was that he didn't use his full strength. After the fierce argument with Mr. President at the official residence that night, because of some very complicated emotions, he was very reluctant to kill the Federation police who were chasing him unless he was forced into a desperate situation. Not to mention that if he used his full strength from the beginning, it would be too easy for him to get hungry. After all, he had suffered a lot in the past few years, and now he was very careful when he fought. It was not easy to replenish the supplies in the underground sewer. Sulu walked up the quiet stone stairs under the leaves. Thinking of the scene where he dodged the bullets in the previous battle, he vaguely captured the feeling of an uncle who was proud of the universe in the past. He couldn't help but grin slightly, revealing a slightly infatuated smile. "Do you have any energy bars for camping?" Taking down a pile of cheap hats from the wall, he lowered his head to hide his face and asked the boss who was watching TV behind the counter in a low voice. The boss of the department store hidden at the end of the hillside alley was a man in his 50s. At this time, he was watching the special program on the Federation News channel attentively. After hearing his question, he directly took out a large pile of energy bars suitable for children from the cardboard box under his feet and asked, "What flavor do you want, strawberry or the original flavor?" Strawberry." Sulu was stunned for a moment and replied. Following the boss's focused expression, he subconsciously raised his head and his eyes fell on the TV screen hanging on the wall. In the news screen, the tan politician still had a cold face and was sincerely and worriedly shouting at someone. "The Federation has reached its most dangerous moment, and we need your response. In the name of the elected president of the Federation, I assure you that as long as you return to the light, you will definitely receive the most fair trial under the Federation's laws." The president of the Federation was directly calling out to an important fugitive of the Federation through a television screen. This was something that had never happened before in history. Other than President Pabre being able to obtain a few disdainful evaluations, the Federation government would not be able to obtain any benefits. Why would he so sincerely call out to him through the screen of light? Frowning deeply, Sulu looked at the light beam. Looking at the tragic scenes in the front line flashing on the left half of the light beam, the rolling reports of failures, and the protesting crowds on the streets, he seemed to have understood something. Although he was wanted, many people of the Federation silently stood on Su Li's side. They did not need any reason, nor did they believe in the reasons given by the government. Gradually, more and more people no longer remained silent. They angrily walked onto the streets, protesting against the government's persecution of their heroes and idols. The Federation government wanted to use the ocean of people to fight a war against Su Lu alone. Right now, in this ocean, at least a portion of the waves did not want to drown him, but wanted to hold his feet up. Different from George Carlin back then, Su Lu was now an important figure who could influence public opinion in the Federation. Or perhaps it could be said that a heroic figure relied heavily on the deliberate propaganda of the Federation government. Naturally, it could not escape from President Pabre's appreciation and cultivation. In other words, the Federation government and President Pabre had cultivated the most troublesome enemy for themselves. Right now, in order to eliminate this enemy, they had to put in even greater effort. Sulu used a rope to string up the stack of 12 cloth hats. He put the purchased food and other supplies into the plastic bag. His slightly lowered head, however, was quickly analyzing other matters. The Federation had been preparing for a late spring offensive all this time, but in the end, they suddenly suffered such a heavy blow from the Imperial armies. Victory and defeat on the battlefield were normal, but he always felt that there was something strange about the failure on the front lines. Before leaving the West Woods Sunset Province, The negotiations between Su Lu and the Empire's underground resistance organization had come to an end. Muin returned to the Empire ahead of time. According to the route Muin had privately told him, this big shot of the Empire's underworld who loved wearing fur coats the most might choose Mo Hua planet to carry out some strategic plans that were hidden from both sides of the Empire's Federation. Did the Empire's counterattack on Mo Hua planet have anything to do with those people from the Underground Resistance Organization? According to the Federation's official statement of panic, that princess directly led this terrifying counterattack. However, with Huai Caoshi's identity, why would she care about the ownership of a mere transport planet? Su Li's brows were deeply furrowed. He could not figure it out, no matter how much he thought about it. He vaguely guessed that there was some anger or absurdity in advance. In his mind, he asked the old man to help investigate this matter. He shook his head and lowered his head to continue organizing the goods in silence. $167.20. Thank you for your patronage. The white-haired male boss looked at the screen of the television and yawned. Su Lu reached out to take out the money. Then he saw a few milk tablets and vitamin tablets in the last hat. He could not help but be stunned. These were not the goods he chose, and the price of these things was not included in the amount that the male boss said. Don't be fooled. These guys love to lie. The boss rubbed his white hair and pointed at the news screen on the wall. He narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "You have to be careful when you're outside." "Thank you." Su Lu smiled. Carrying a large black plastic bag, he walked out of the department store and followed the green leaves on the stone path. Run quickly. The outside has already been surrounded. Leave through the underground passage. Don't go to the branch station. That place is definitely under the control of the black dogs of the Intelligence Bureau. What are you panicking for? The casino is surrounded, but does not mean that it is here. This was the largest city in the Empire's Mo Hua planet's Cheshire County. The last base of the Underground Resistance Organization was hidden under this casino. Mr. Muin frowned. His right hand unconsciously rubbed his smooth fur. Looking at the panicked soldiers, he gave out orders in a deep voice. He comforted his companions, but his heart gradually turned cold. As the plenipotentiary of the Empire's Underground Resistance Organization, after leaving the Westwoods region and passing through the warp space tunnel of the Gary Corridor to return to the left Skystar region, Muin chose to jump back to the Mo Hua planet. Only on a planet that was still being fought over by the Federation and the Empire could the Underground Resistance Organization's abilities be fully displayed. Whether it was to open up a new battlefield here or to find an opportunity to escape back to Tianjing planet, Muin needed to make use of the situation. However, he did not expect that not long after the spaceship secretly landed on the Mo Hua planet, the Empire's troops would suddenly go crazy and launch a fierce attack on the areas controlled by the Federal forces. The Federal forces also seemed to have gone crazy. They made a few command mistakes for no reason, causing a few large cities to be taken back by the Empire's troops one after another. This included the city he was in now. The Empire's cold, black hibiscus flag mecha troops had already taken over every important place in this city. The Empire's army was continuously searching for these underground resistance organization members who should have died long ago. The people in the simple underground base quietened down, listening to the faint footsteps of the heavy mecha above their heads, the occasional gunshot, and the screams of women. The soldiers of the Underground Resistance Organization had red eyes. They held the guns in their hands tightly and felt a dry and piercing pain in their throats. Muin frowned and looked at the backup underground escape tunnel. He did not say a word and did not give the order to retreat. Although the end of the underground tunnel looked dark and empty, he felt that there was some kind of great danger waiting for him there. "We have to go." A resistance organization officer moved closer to his ear with an anxious expression and whispered quickly, "The Army has the black dog of the Intelligence Department as a navigation system. They can find us at any time." What helped Muin to make up his mind was a loud thud from the sturdy alloy cover above his head. It was obvious that the Empire's Wolf Fong mecha broke through the concrete shield and used its heavy mechanical arm to smash the alloy cover. Let's go. He shook his head, tightened his black fur coat, and led the most elite members of the underground resistance organization to quickly walk into the dark underground tunnel. However, at the end of the underground tunnel, a loud noise suddenly came. A huge explosion of unknown origin spewed out strong airwaves and sharp fragments, knocking all 30 of them to the ground. Almost at the same time, the terrifying Empire's wolf Fong Mecha easily tore through the sturdy alloy cover and jumped into the underground space like a black and ugly grim reaper jumping out of the darkness. Why don't you kill me? You are all experts. Save your energy. The mafia boss, Mu-In, who was tightly tied to a pillar by a high-strength plastic rope, coughed violently as he stared indifferently at the officer of the Imperial Intelligence Bureau in front of him. In front of him were the corpses of more than a dozen resistance fighters. The slightly dark blood was about to solidify in this last underground base. I heard that you just came back from the Federation. Just based on this, it is enough to execute you 10 times to atone for your crimes. The Empire's Intelligence Department officer coldly slapped his face. But you can't die now, because we need you to go to the Federation again. Muin turned his neck with difficulty and looked at the Intelligence Department officer's side profile. He didn't understand what these black dogs wanted to do. At this moment, a thin man walked down from the temporarily built stairs. This person was wearing the military uniform of a second lieutenant. His face was ordinary, and his messy short hair was covered with dust from the battlefield. It was such an ordinary-looking, low-level Empire officer, but he made the high-ranking officers of the Intelligence Department in the field shiver. It was as if even their breathing was about to stop. The thin young second lieutenant officer of the Empire quietly walked up to Muin. His pair of black, gem-like eyes naturally revealed coldness and strong confidence. He said, "I need you to take me to the Federation. The big guys are too awesome." Although they escaped at the speed of light, right before they were about to touch them, they forced Potato and 72 to call for help. That feeling was really high. I really want to say to those wretched guys in front of me, it's useless to shout until your throat is broken. Just give in. Chapter 773. Muin stared at the skinny young Imperial officer through his blood-stained vision. From the man's dark eyes and the black hair under his military cap, he was sure that the man was a noble. He might even be a member of the royal family, but he did not know what his identity was. He forced himself to suppress the shock in his heart, coughed a few times, and said scornfully, "Although I don't know why a master like you insists on going to the Federation to die. Do you think that I will really send you there just because you want me to?" Because of the the glory of the Charter, it was impossible for the Empire to infiltrate the Federation with intelligence personnel. Similarly, because of the chip on the back of the Federation's neck, the citizens of the Federation could not enter the Empire's territory, except for Sulu. But now, because of the cooperation between the federal military and the Empire's underground resistance, there seemed to be some possibility of infiltration. Muin finally understood why so many of the Empire's elite troops would appear on this Mo planet, and why the underground base of the organization would suffer from the enemy's relentless and terrifying attacks. All of this was because the Empire's royal family and military had keenly grasped that gap in the universe. Only by pretending to be a negotiation member of the underground resistance could this young noble officer enter the Federation. Muin did not even think about why the other party would take such a big risk and directly rejected the other party's request. This was related to the long-term cooperation between the Federation and the underground resistance, and related to the end of the bloody lives of the Empire's slaves. He did not care about any threats. "My name is Huai Chaoshi." The skinny Imperial noble officer calmly looked at the blood-stained face of the underworld boss and said slowly with her hands behind her back, "Most people call me Su Ming. I rarely make requests to people, but as long as I do, no one will reject me." Hearing the other party's identity, Muon's pupils shrank, and he tilted his head in disbelief, trying to let the blood his eyes out so that it would not blur his vision. He stared at the dazzling princess in front of him, And after a long silence, he said with a hoarse voice, "I refuse. I've said it before. No one can reject me. At least in the left heaven starfield." Huaichaoshu narrowed his eyes and calmly sized up the prisoner. He suddenly said, "I don't want to use your mother, your wife, or your children to threaten you." This city was the most famous tourist destination on the ink flower planet. The main colors of the city were yellow and rose red, and they looked particularly charming under the blue sky. Unfortunately, in the past few months, the fierce battle between the Empire and the Federal Army and the explosions of countless missiles had made the most beautiful bay buildings in the city look exceptionally desolate, with huge gaps appearing from time to time. Huaichaoshu walked up the old-style limestone stone steps to the balcony of a building by the bay. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the white seabirds on the sea in the distance. She was calm and silent. In the building behind her, Muin was undergoing the most professional interrogation by the Empire's military intelligence. Further behind, in space, a high-speed battleship was approaching from the Tianjing planet. On it was Muin's family. Her silky black hair fluttered wildly in the sea breeze. She stuffed her hair into her military cap with her fingers, then took out a light brown lens and put it into her eyes. She thought to herself that she still needed to dye her hair before she left, but she didn't know what color she should dye her hair to make it look good. Would that important leader of the underground resistance agree to take her to the Federation? The proud and expressionless princess wasn't worried about this problem at all. She didn't think about those Muin's family members who were escorted over. Just based on the extremely professional methods of the old experts of the intelligence department, she believed that no one in the universe could withstand it. Oh, except for that small-eyed man. Huaichaoshu's eyes narrowed even more. She looked at the white beach under the white balcony and was speechless. No matter how exaggerated it was, it could only be described as delicate and pretty, but there was actually a rare hint of worry and heaviness in her eyes. The seabirds and the waves flew over, breaking through the waves and hiding behind the clouds. They landed nearby like ink dots, completely covering the white beach. Not a single grain of sand could be seen. Looking at this scene, she silently thought to herself, "Once you cross paths, it won't be easy to meet again." The terrorist attack on Parliament Hill, the bizarre assassination of the Federation's vice president, the continuous losses at the front lines, and the Federation's hero suddenly became a wanted criminal. Such stories played out one after another in the Capitol Ring in the 72nd year of the constitutional calendar. It was like white clouds drifting over with cold faces and piling together to form an ink cloud that was about to break through the city. It made the citizens feel depressed, nervous, sad, and uneasy. Then someone had to come out and take responsibility. The political factions that lost in the election shouted like this. The families that didn't live too comfortably for the past 5 years pushed the puppets on the stage and shouted with cold eyes. The presidential candidates that were in the midst of an election that they were bound to lose shouted angrily at a gathering. All of the Federation citizens angrily banged their chopsticks and shouted at the white meat in their own cafeterias. Who was going to take responsibility? The Federation government or the wanted Colonel Sulo? Different people had different opinions in their hearts. If one had to make a vague definition, the older citizens who were more willing to believe in the government and loved the glory of the Federation from the bottom of their hearts insisted that Su Lu, who had an association with the terrorist suspect and the traitor Yufeng, who had ignored the summons of the Federation government and insisted on fleeing, causing the entire Federation society to fall into a state of disintegration, should naturally take full responsibility. However, for the youths and students who were full of hot blood and dared to parade shirtless on the streets in the cold weather of Linhai, the Federation government's persecution of war heroes and fabricating a mess of crimes was obviously to cover up the conspiracy that Colonel Sulu hinted at in the press conference. Thus, they came up with another F*King disgusting conspiracy. If this filthy government didn't take responsibility, then who would take responsibility and who would step down? Fierce arguments occurred on online political forums, in tea houses and bars, and even in classrooms and families. respected professors, and indignant losers in the election for president of the Federation. A middle-aged manager who had just returned from work at the white meat factory, and his son who had just entered his first year of high school. Countless arguments erupted in every corner of the Federation society. Bad news of failure came from the front line again. More than half of the Mo planet fell into the hands of the Empire. The federal forces seemed to be forced to give up the late spring offensive. The people in the arguments fell into silence. 2 days later, the three major Federation unions and the Veterans Association announced the launch of the largest strike in the history of the Federation. At this most dangerous time, they fully supported the Federation government and the frontline troops. A sad thing happened in the circle. A book friend specially sent me a message to tell me about it. Sigh. Everyone needs to take care of their health and cherish the people in front of them and the elderly at home. The cold is not a big problem, but my whole body is sore and my head is spinning. These 2,000 words are really hard to write. Even Contech, who is eating Red Box, I heard that it's fiercer. I hope it's true. I have to lie down as a corpse again soon. I've been so miserable recently. Let's not talk about other things. Anyway, there's still 10 days left in this last month of the year. I still have time to prove to you and to myself that as long as I make up my mind. Cats are actually very hardworking, crazy, powerful, and awesome animals. Chapter 774. Since the beginning of the constitutional era, from the Republic to the Federation, whether it was the chairman or the president, their rule or management of the Three Woods Galaxy was actually a difficult time dancing with the Seven Wolves. The seven families with terrifying power hid in the shadows after the end of the imperial rule. They coldly stared at the regime on the stage. Although the wolf's mouth was not like a blood basin, it spat out white fog in the cold winter season. Their sharp teeth were sometimes visible in the white fog. When they felt threatened or hungry, they would suddenly pounce and tear off a large piece of bloody flesh from the opponent's body. In the eyes of these families, the stories and incidents that happened around the 70th year of the 37th constitutional calendar were nothing more than a routine plot or a boring repetition of history. Even the death of the tiger, Sillin, only made them join the government in coldly joining in the feast. It wasn't until the death of the military god, Li Bofu, that these families smelled something extremely dangerous from the explosion of the ancient bell. Then, through Su Li's escape, they realized that the current government seemed to be very different from the previous governments in terms of execution. Thus, they became vigilant. After becoming vigilant, the families began to use the media they controlled to launch public opinion attacks on the government and the man in the official residence through the so-called persecution of the Federation hero. Parliament Hill, which had been strongly influenced by them, also began to try to limit the expansion of the government's power or desire for power. But they did not expect that the Federation government and President Pabre, faced with this seemingly internal and external situation, did not panic. They were so calm that it was frightening. They did not use administrative means to fight back. They just waited calmly until a big event happened. It was a massive demonstration. A demonstration in support of the government that was rarely seen in the history of the Federation. In the huge industrial parks all over the Federation, there were billions of industrial workers who were members of the three major trade unions. The Veterans Association had the strong support of countless retired soldiers and the collective respect of the society. When such an influential civil organization suddenly launched a demonstration, one could imagine what kind of scene it would be. According to the demands of the three industrial unions, except for the enterprises involved in military supplies, all the workers in the industrial zones refused to go to work and took to the streets. Especially in the Federation's heavy industrial base S2, the strike rate had reached a terrifying 60%. The entire Federation's economy was seriously threatened. According to the post-event statistics, the strike and demonstration in the early autumn of the 72nd year of the constitutional calendar was the largest in history, and it led to the most disastrous losses for enterprises. The momentum was so great that it was unprecedented. Every corner of the society was shaken and even trembled because of it. Countless ordinary citizens of the Federation walked onto the streets. People were holding simple, self-made slogans and shouting slogans loudly in grief and indignation, inciting the bystanders on the streets to dance and join the crowd. In front of the strikers that broke out in the various states of the Federation, there were batches of disabled soldiers in wheelchairs or on crutches. With solemn expressions and military medals on their chests, they were marching toward their respective destinations, the square or the city hall. In the face of these heroic veterans, the government's riot police didn't dare to do anything. In fact, it was the request of the president's office that all government agencies were not allowed to do anything to stop the strike. As the strike deepened, as well as the loud and powerful slogans, such as who should be responsible for the victory of the war on the front lines, the battle of public opinion that had puzzled the Federation's citizens for a long time suddenly changed. The power gathered by the will of the people was so terrifying that it could affect the media's reporting and even the rational judgment of many people around them. Not many people still believed that the Federation was persecuting Colonel Sulu. Even the young students who were shouting themselves hoarse for Sulu just last week joined the strikers who were crying for the government and calling for unity in the Federation. Perhaps this seemed a bit absurd, but in fact, it was just a kind of tragedy. The ordinary people who lacked enough real information for reference would always easily stand on the side that seemed reasonable in their analysis and judgment of the situation. Whether it was reasonable or not, in fact, it depended on whose voice was louder. This wasn't a political swing like a fence-sitter, but the natural choice of the frustrated social animals. The great families who had just woken up and were preparing to control, or at least check and balance the Federation's government, and President Pabre were forced to remain silent at this moment. The media they controlled couldn't directly confront the ocean of angry people. The giant enterprises they controlled that could affect the Federation's survival couldn't ignore this terrifying strike and choose to confront the government because they were the 7 great families. However, they were the 7 great families of the Federation. They couldn't watch the Federation walk to the edge of collapse because if that happened, they wouldn't have a corpse left. A few years ago, Medellin, who was investigated by the Federation government, had remotely controlled those fanatical young George Carlin activists in the Ministry of Justice to raise a demonstration that shook the Federation, thus forcing the government and the 7 great families to choose to compromise. At the time, Mr. Pabre, who was his competitor, had always maintained his silence. Now, this great strike that was far more powerful than the New Year finally made the 7 great families and the people in the Federation's political circle realize just what kind of lofty prestige President Pabre had among the people at the bottom of the Federation's hierarchy. In the past few decades, Pabre had worked tirelessly to fight public interest cases for the ordinary workers. It was very rare that he was the chief lawyer of the 3 great industrial unions and the Veteran Association. He was deeply loved and respected. This experience had undoubtedly played a great role in today's public tide that affected several star regions. From this perspective, when Medellin raised the Federation's unrest, Pabre's silence was actually just a kind of condescending calmness and confidence. Looking back at the past, and looking at the crowds of people on the streets today, this kind of calmness and confidence was terrifying. The Federation's great strike went on for the 2nd day. Hundreds of thousands of marching troops marched from the industrial park in the southern suburbs of the capital to the capital's special district on foot. The mighty demonstration troops completely paralyzed the ground transportation in the capital's special district, and the big shots who felt the threat of this fanatical crowd took the air transportation in advance and left their respective residences. At noon that day, President Pabre gave a speech in front of the president's official residence. The fanatical and chaotic demonstrators crowded the entire Charter Square. When they heard the president's hoarse and tired voice that was still full of upward spirit, everyone quieted down. This was truly an incredible scene. The appeal of human beings who had a common goal oscillated and amplified each other, gradually turning into a kind of control that had a religious and sacred feeling. This kind of control could not be seen at all. It was silent and invisible, and it was only exchanged in people's eyes and gestures. In the speech, President Pabre told the demonstrators the root cause of the military failure in the front line, severely criticized the selfish manipulation of a certain financial association and its affiliated media organizations, and asked the parliament to pass several important wartime regulations. At the same time, he called on the people who participated in the demonstration in the Federation to try their best to stay calm and return to their posts as soon as possible, because the Federation in war needs your passion and desire for justice. But it also needs your labor and wisdom to win a comprehensive victory against the Empire. What kind of humiliation was this kind of call to take the overall situation into consideration? The dense and silent crowd in Charter Square suddenly erupted into a huge wave of applause and cheers. The young female students were so excited that tears were streaming down their faces. The middle-aged workers were so excited that their faces turned red, and the disabled veterans in wheelchairs at the front of the line touched the military medal on their left chest with their right hand and looked at the president on the stage with a determined expression, vowing to fight for the glory of the Federation until the last drop of blood was shed. The president called on the people who participated in the strike to return to their posts. However, the people who deeply understood the difficult situation of the government from his speech swarmed to the Parliament Hill before the end of the strike. They shouted angrily, waved the photocopied votes in their hands, and asked the Parliament members who were urgently convening the Parliament to immediately pass several important bills submitted by the government. Naturally, Parliament Hill would not back down just like that. After all, although the temporary wartime regulations did not significantly relax the authority of the government, two of the regulations related to the audit of funds were directly related to how deeply those few large families could hide in the shadows of history. The angry demonstrators calmly did not rush to the cordon under the long stone stairs, but they surrounded the magnificent building and threw countless artificial eggs and squid on the stone stairs, adding countless stains to the building that had just finished its outer wall. Wearing a single windbreaker, Bob walked on the street with a gloomy face. The reflection of the fire on the corner of the street was reflected in his eyes. An overturned police car was burning, and it seemed to have ignited the thick cigarette that he had forgotten to light at the corner of his mouth. The streets of the Capital Special District were full of garbage and waste. The cleaning workers' strike would continue until the next morning, which meant that the city swept by the demonstration would still look like a garbage dump until the next morning. Relying on the efficient organization of the three industrial unions and the Veterans Association, the strong guidance of the police department, and the continuous appeals of the government and President Pabre, the fanatical demonstrators did not lose control. The Capital Special District was very lucky to be safe. However, there were always some unexpected situations, such as the overturned police car that was burning and a luxury store that was smashed into ruins in a more remote corner. The situation is not dangerous, but the trend is too dangerous. At the corner of the street, Bob lowered his head and lit the thick cigarette in the hand of Wood, who came to pick him up. He looked around cautiously and said in a low voice, "Using the power of the people to fight against the power of the powerful class. Once it gets out of control, there will be big problems." Wood smiled and said, "But I quite like to see those old men panic. The Federation is not an empire. Of course, there is unfairness, but I insist that there is no such thing as an old man." After a pause, Bob frowned and said, "The official residents rejected my application. It seems that Mr. President is not willing to talk to our disobedient newspaper." Chapter 775. At a time like this, you can't expect Mr. President to have enough patience to listen to the nagging of a chief editor. Wood paused, lit the slender cigarette between his fingers, shook his head, and said, "Even the Post and several other newspapers with a clear background have now withdrawn their tentacles under the pressure of the public. The voices we can make, or the power these voices can convey, may not be enough for the government to show enough respect." Maybe so. Chief Editor Bob fastened the collar of his windbreaker and walked side by side with Wood to the newspaper office. However, Just as they turned the corner and were still a few hundred meters away from the newspaper office, they were forced to stop. "Gentlemen, please don't go there." Dark yellow police lines blocked both ends of the street. Dozens of policemen anxiously shouted and blocked the crowd. Fortunately, today's demonstration had dispersed. Otherwise, with just these people and a few thin yellow police lines, it was absolutely impossible to maintain order at the scene. Chief Editor Bob looked at the burning newspaper office building hundreds of meters away. His pupils shrank sharply, and the thick cigarette in his mouth fell to the ground with a bang, making a few sparks. Wood opened his mouth in shock, stared at the building where he usually worked, stared at the terrible flames floating out of the windows, and trembled with anger. He pushed the policeman in front of him and roared, "Let us go. There are still people in the newspaper office." "Mr. Reporter, the staff in the newspaper office building have been safely evacuated." The policeman who maintained order guessed the identity of the two middle-aged men, and his attitude was slightly gentler. He explained, except for a few slightly burned staff members who were under observation in the 4th Hospital, no one was injured. Hearing that his colleagues in the newspaper office were safe, Wood's shock and worry eased a lot, and his angry movements subconsciously stopped. He stared at the newspaper office building in the distance, which was burning miserably like a giant torch, and subconsciously grabbed his hair in pain and murmured in a trembling voice, "What the hell is going on? What the hell is going on?" Chief Editor Bob looked at the building where he had been working since he graduated from journalism school. He pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word. The building was burning, turning into a charred ruin. The fierce fire seemed to be burning away the passion of his youth, the persistence of his middle age, and his original view of the world. This kind of burning in the depths of his heart should be an extremely painful thing, but there was not much expression on his face. Gradually, even the anger disappeared, and there was only calmness and even indifference. Bob still felt that he couldn't see clearly enough. He couldn't see clearly enough. He couldn't see the scene of the death of something precious in his heart. He slowly took out a pair of glasses from the inside pocket of his windbreaker and put them on. A big fire can burn everything, including the secret database that we are so proud of. Red, yellow, and black flames were reflected on the spectacles. Bob's cold eyes penetrated the spectacles and looked at the burning building. He suddenly said faintly. Wood's body suddenly stiffened as he stared at the side of his face in disbelief. If this fire was not an accident, then who dared to burn the most credible news agency of the Federation into ruins? Was it really the government? Medellin is dead, and Pabre won the election. I thought the world had changed a lot. Mr. Reporter, who was known for his fearless spirit and his ability to entertain the paparazzi, remembered the Medellin case investigation that had won him the Nebula Award for Best Documentary Reporting. He painfully frowned and looked at the building that was getting bigger and bigger. He said in a hoarse and angry voice, "In the end, nothing has changed. Could it be that those people want to break my leg again? Or are they going to kill us?" The fire is an action and a warning. Although it is difficult to kill two famous reporters of the Federation and then disguise it as an accident, I believe that if we continue, such a tragic ending will definitely be waiting for us not far away. Chief Editor Bob said expressionlessly. Then he lowered his head and looked at the thick tobacco that was struggling to survive in the autumn wind. He said, "I am very disappointed with all of this." Wood's eyes became sharp and hot. He stared at the flames that were spreading outside the building in the distance. He looked at the busy police in front of him and the fire ladder truck that was obviously late. He lowered his voice and said fiercely, "I want to go in and grab that information. The memory is not necessarily damaged by the fire. Before the fire, all of the memory must have been destroyed." Bob stopped his companion's courageous and adventurous, but obviously stupid and impulsive idea. He said calmly, "But fortunately, I have made a backup in advance." Wood was stunned. He patted the chief editor's shoulder that was not very strong. He smiled awkwardly, but did not laugh out loud. He said in a hoarse voice, "Good job. What should we do next?" "The most important problem we face is what to do about tomorrow's newspaper." Bob rubbed his painful shoulder and said calmly, I will go to the hospital and the police station at this time. You go and contact the experts in the industry. Rent a few workstations first and work overtime tonight. The fiber paper edition will be suspended for 5 days, but the electronic edition must be released on time. Understood, Wood replied very quickly. Then he frowned and asked in a low voice, "Start the report tomorrow? I have already written a part of it. The title is also chosen. It will be called Forever Antique Bell. Too lyrical, but I like it." Chief Editor Bob's tone was particularly serious. He ordered seriously, "But we can't publish it now. Facing such a powerful president and government, I believe that before this report is published, you and I may be robbed and stabbed to death by a street gangster at any time, or be hit by a speeding car again." "I understand. We need to wait for the right time." "That's it." The two of them looked at the burning newspaper building in the distance with a complicated expression across the yellow police line. Then they prepared to leave. At this time, a large piece of heavy object suddenly fell from the edge of the burning newspaper building. It made an extremely loud, muffled sound. Countless sparks and charred pieces of metal splashed everywhere, causing the firefighters on the street to run for cover. The long period of high temperature caused the piece of metal to lose its original appearance. But Bob and Wood knew very well what it was. It was the famous logo of the Capital Special District Daily, a half-eclipsed moon. The moon eclipse. The moon eclipse was not one of the two beautiful moons in the night sky of S1. It was the forgotten asteroid in the sky of Eastwood. Back then, in order to develop the crystal mine resources on Eastwood Planet, the First Republic Federation hid from the management committee occupied by extreme environmentalists and forcibly ordered the 4th Military Region to use prohibited weapons to blow up the asteroid, changing its orbit and leaving behind an extremely ugly moon eclipse that was riddled with scars. There was no need to argue about who was right or wrong in history. For the reporters of the Capital Special District Daily News, the image of the eclipse of the moon reminded them of the famous words uttered by their predecessors when they broke through the government's news blackout at all costs. "Half of the moon has been eclipsed. We need to find out the reason." Chief Editor Bob and Wood looked at the charred moon eclipse image in silence. Their expressions were complicated, and their hearts were heavy. Although it was early autumn, a building was burning not far away. The entire street was occupied by the hot and dry air, but they felt a little cold. Sulu, wearing a hat, stood in the crowd on the street. At this moment, he, like the people around him, seemed to be grabbed by the neck by an invisible hand. He stood on his tiptoes and looked into the distance. This scene looked very interesting. It was like those rich people who could get documents from HTED to raise cats, grabbing the soft skin behind the cat's neck. The crowd was like many cats who did not know what their owners were thinking. They stared curiously at the burning building, guessing what had happened. Did it have anything to do with the rally in the morning? Did anyone die? How many people died? Would there be a memorial service tomorrow? There were all kinds of questions. The indifferent sadness made people feel that it was not so sincere. Sulu left quietly, lit a dry cigarette in the autumn wind, and walked with his head down through the city that was getting darker and darker. He did not think that there was any difference between him and the crowd, but he seemed to be able to vaguely understand what the real masters of the Federation were thinking. At least he knew that those people wanted to kill him. These days, he, who had been traveling in the underground world and on the surface, was facing the almost omnipresent pursuit of the Federation government. At the south gate of the Botanical Garden and outside the walls of the 33 protein meat synthesis factory, he had been attacked several times in a row. The situation was extremely dangerous. Although the old man still stood on his side in a reserved and uneasy manner, in the face of the Federation government, which had a secondary surveillance network and countless resources, he, who was only one person, was still too weak in the end. Especially recently, the intensity and precision of the government's pursuit made him sensitive enough to smell a trace of danger. Behind the surveillance cameras on the streets and alleys, there seemed to be a group of very powerful people hidden, and they were trying their best to hunt him down. These people were very professional, but they did not have the bureaucratic inefficiency that was unique to the Federation Investigation Bureau. These people were very professional, but they were not as easy to be careless as the army. Their calculation methods were very meticulous and very targeted. Yes, targeted. The continuous attacks and the sense of crisis that was getting closer and closer to death made Sulu feel that these people understood him very well, and sometimes even more accurately than he did in grasping his combat style and choice of action. In addition to speculating with interest about the composition of the team, he often thought about President Pabre's conversation in the official residence when he was underground these days. However, today, when he saw the newspaper building burned to a crisp, he realized that he had made a mistake. If you're not good at thinking, then don't think. If you're used to doing more and saying less, then don't think too much and do too little. Since many people praised him for being good at simplifying complicated things, then after returning from the West Woods, he should not choose the opposite behavior pattern. In the end, people should still walk the path they are familiar with. For Sulu, who was walking on the streets of the capital, what he should do, and what he would do, was to raise the gun in his hand and defend his principles. Chapter 776. I heard that 2 police officers were killed in today's parade. That has nothing to do with us. I heard that the Capitol Daily building was burnt to a crisp because a plate maker was smoking in the underground workshop. That still has nothing to do with us. The official flipped the badge between his fingers and very rudely refused Biderman's attempt to chat. Although the young former technical genius of the Bureau of Proclamation played a very important role in the team, the official couldn't help but feel disgusted by the habits of these so-called geniuses whenever he thought that the combat genius was looking at him indifferently in the underground tunnel. The pattern on the badge was a squinting eye. This small troop, specially established by the government, was gradually perfecting its structure with special uniforms and equipment. The cooperation between the members was getting better and better, and their work was getting smoother and smoother. They were getting closer and closer to their ultimate goal. But what frustrated everyone in the Small Eyes troop was that although they were infinitely close to the goal and had even lured the enemy out of the underground tunnel and trapped him under the wall, the enemy still managed to escape in the end. It seemed that the target was right in front of them, but they didn't know where his real body was hidden in the city. Don't be too frustrated and don't be too nervous. Smoking a cigarette, Biderman looked at his colleagues in the room and laughed exaggeratedly. He waved his hand and said, "This independent area has been specially set up by me. Together with those back doors, the Federal Central Computer doesn't know what we are doing at all. Then, that Colonel Su Lun naturally doesn't know either." The official ignored him and waved his hand to summon all the members of the Small Eyes troop around the wide hologram table. His fingers quickly flipped through the electronic pattern and said in a deep voice, "For the next plan, the Strategic Research Division of the Investigation Bureau has given some new suggestions." What suggestions? The tone of the question was very calm. The members of the Small Eyes troop in this building, who came from various powerful agencies of the Federation government, seemed to have a certain trait in common: the indifference and lethargy unique to technical personnel. The psychology professor took over the topic of the official and pointed at the picture on the table. This is the archive of the investigation of the Federation Investigation Bureau a few years ago. It is a high-resolution satellite image of the traces left by Colonel Su Lu after he smoked and thought in Charter Square, before he made up his mind to assassinate Senator Medellin. From the arrangement of these cigarette butts, we can confirm that he is a very orderly person. Biderman continued his sarcastic remarks. Looking at the picture of the plum blossom-shaped cigarette butts in the snow, he said sarcastically, "Perhaps this only shows that our Federation hero is an artistic youth at heart." Like all his colleagues, the professor of psychology had long learned to automatically filter the voice of this young technical genius. He continued, "According to the peripheral interview, Colonel Su Lu has a small habit after smoking, and that is he will carefully crush the cigarette, and only stop when he is sure that there is no spark. Also, except for the mental struggle between the battlefield and the last time he tried to assassinate Senator Macklin, he will throw every cigarette but into the non-recyclable bin." Biderman said in a slightly shrill voice, What can this prove? Is he a person who keeps order and is extremely cautious? Think about it with your pig brain. Is a colonel of the Federation full of masculine hormones who assassinated senator with outstanding military exploits the kind of person you think he is? In the past, I have always thought that you have a very outstanding strength, and that is that you can always be exceptionally calm and cautious in all kinds of battles. So, I really did not expect that you would be crazy enough to choose this place to meet me. Zoe did not draw her eyebrows today, but her eyebrows were still as beautiful as a painting. She slowly cut the premium steak in front of her, her eyes slightly lowered, but it seemed that she was carefully observing the friend across the table who she had not seen for a long time. However, she did not have much appetite. Her red fingers, which were painted with cardamom, put down the silver knife and fork and held the glass of red wine by the thin glass neck. She raised the glass and drank the wine in one gulp, frowning somewhat painfully. A very important elder to me once said some last words to me before he died. Although he seems to be alive and well now, I have never forgotten these last words. Su Lu chewed the really delicious and juicy beef in big mouthfuls. He lowered his head and replied vaguely. He said that the most dangerous place is the safest place, but it is best not to try it more than 3 times. I have been on the run for so many years, and I have never practiced this teaching, but you know the recent situation. If I don't try this method now, I may never have the chance to try it again. Zoe looked at him quietly, without showing any concern or worry, because concern and worry did not need to be expressed with eyebrows. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with an exquisite napkin with the 3 ancient letters LFB written on it, and said, "So you chose to meet here. Mr. President and the government must be the most vigilant now that I have joined hands with those big families. This is the Lu Feng Slope Club, which is close to the Charter Square and the official residence. Naturally, it is the most dangerous place." Su Lu finished the steak in front of him and drank half a glass of water with satisfaction. He explained, "In the field that I am not very good at, I am used to respecting the opinions of experts. The elder you just mentioned must be the best escape expert in this universe." Zoe shrugged and noticed his eating speed. She said, "It seems that you have not had a chance to eat anything good while hiding in the underground tunnel. I like steak. I liked it very much when I was in Donglan." Su Lu took another sip of water. Zoe suddenly asked, "About that proposal, what is your answer? Since Madame asked for my opinion through you, then you should reject her and the other families for me." Su Lu replied, "This has nothing to do with moral cleanliness. It's just that our goals are not the same to begin with. I don't want to see the scene after dealing with Macklin, where I was stabbed in the back by my companions just as I saw the glimmer of victory." Speaking of this, he remembered the magnolia that disappeared outside the Huanshan Four States Foundation building and the knife that he stabbed Lao by in the back. The end of a lone hero is always death. The war between a person and a government can never be won. Even if you don't believe in Macho and those families, I suggest that you can use some of their power. Zoe calmly gave her advice, as before. "I understand. I don't want them to participate in my plan because it is very dangerous for me. But I need them to provide me with something," Su Lu said. "You don't want them to be partners, but only a logistics base?" Zoe smiled sweetly and looked at her good friend. "I think those big families will be very angry because their dignity has been damaged. I have my own way to get weapons. In fact, what I need Madam to do is very simple. I heard that the number 2 of the Central Committee of Green Dragon Mountain is coming to the Capital Special District for a visit. I hope that she can arrange for this big shot to give a speech in the Parliament. What do you want to do?" Zoe looked at him warily. "You come from a military family, so you should know that the battle plan cannot be exposed," Su Lu said. Zoe was silent for a long time and said, "You have to be careful." "Yes." Su Lu looked at the Guna porcelain plate in front of him with traces of blood. He thought of the fierce argument with the old thing in the underground sewers and how the old thing still agreed to his request in the end. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Zoe. He frowned and asked, "Is it possible to give me an MXD?" Zoe looked at him and said mockingly, "That cheap father-in-law of yours has already been sent to S3. Even if he is still the Minister of Defense, I can't get you an MXD. I don't know what you did that night, but all of the Federation's troops increased their combat readiness and surveillance. It's impossible to get you a mecha without anyone noticing. Su Lu frowned. He silently thought about which direction the Shell Motor Company's door was facing. In the building that was vaguely independent of the comprehensive monitoring of the charter, the Small Eyes unit was still in a high-intensity discussion. Other than the combat team, led by the Philadelphia close combat expert, all of the staff of this special unit had to be trapped in the building for a long time and could not go out. This special environment indirectly squeezed these technical officers to think of one strange trap after another. Colonel Su Lu is a very difficult person to deal with. The psychology professor came to the final conclusion. With his combat experience, special charter authority, and the calm and careful nature of an engineer, it is very difficult to use conventional methods to catch or kill him. The results of the previous few operations have proven this point. Go straight to the conclusion. The high-ranking official brought up another image on the table. He looked coldly at the people in the room and said, "We have to anger him and force him into the mental environment that he had before he assassinated Senator Macklin. Only then can we set up a perfect trap and kill him." According to the confidential information we have, the spy from Green Dragon Mountain that Colonel Su Lu tried to avenge was actually killed by both the government and Green Dragon Mountain. And we believe that Colonel Su Lu himself has also found out this. The official pointed to the old man in the image and said, "His name is Jean Shioda, the second most important person in the Central Committee of Green Dragon Mountain. Since the death of that legendary figure, he has been the nominal leader of the intelligence system of the anti-government army. In a few days, this person will visit the Capital Special District. If Su Lu wants to kill this person, this is the best opportunity, and this will also be our best opportunity." Biderman raised his hand to raise an objection. He said, "If I remember correctly, Colonel Su Lu has been hiding in the underground water for many days and has not taken any action. If he can still hold back this time, what will you do? How will you anger him?" "We still have the second bait." The official pulled up another image and pointed to the colonel wearing the windbreaker of the 4th Military Region. He said, "His name is Colonel Lake, and he was arrested for the Ancient Bell incident. The Federation military court will acquit him later." The official raised his head and looked at the people in the room. He said in a cold voice, "When Colonel Lake walks out of the court, Su Lu will definitely try to kill him. Do you understand?" If Biderman still wanted to argue. In his opinion, no matter how powerful a person was facing the pursuit of the entire Federation, it was impossible for him to expose his whereabouts for these so-called baits because it was obviously courting death. The official directly interrupted his question and said, "If he can control his anger like this, then he is not the Colonel Su Lu that we desperately want to kill." Lu Feng's Slope Club. Zhou looked at the small half-cup of water in Su Li's hand and frowned slightly. She said, "The military court is about to start the trial of Colonel Lake's rebellion. I think you should be mentally prepared for the result." "Yes." Su Lu drank the remaining water in the cup and said, "If the court acquits him, then I will kill him before he walks out of the court." Chapter 777. Zhou looked at the red wine in the glass held by her slender fingers. Her eyes were a little unfocused, which was rare. Su Li's answer was very simple and calm, just like when he softly told her in the Wangdu Youth Dorm's kitchen that there was only a plate of fried eggs with Chinese tune tonight. But it was this simple and calm that contained too much perseverance and toughness, so much so that her usual coldness turned into a faint sense of loss in an instant. "I grew up in the military compound, surrounded by soldiers whose testosterone was forced out of their skin and leaked out into the air, but I still can't completely understand what men are thinking in their heads." Zhou smiled helplessly. She looked at Su Lu and said softly, "If it's just to avenge Shi Qinghai, is there need to throw in your own life? There are many other reasons other than to avenge the hooligan. I just found out that the attack on Planet Yellow Doom and the defeat of the frontline troops a few days ago were actually the actions of the big shots in the Capitol ring. I can't imagine that the soldiers on the front line fought a bloody battle for the Federation, but because of the political considerations of those people, they sacrificed their lives for nothing. Sulu narrowed his eyes and stared at the empty wine glass in front of him. There was no wine or water in the glass, only air. After a long pause, he took a deep breath and looked at Zoyu. All reasons are reasons, but none of them are the most important reasons. I want to kill them because I think it's more important that they die. Zoyu didn't say anything. She just carefully wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin with the 3 ancient letters LFP written on it, as if she wanted to prolong this rare reunion. But the reunion was always for the next moment. A firm and cold emotion returned to her eyes. She picked up her leather bag and stood up. She said goodbye to Sulu. Good luck. My luck has always been good, but this time it has nothing to do with luck. Sulu did not hide the dangers of the future from Zoyu. He said calmly, to achieve my goal, I really have to risk my life this time. What he meant by risking his life was to fight for a bright and bloody future. Zoyu tightened her grip on her purse, and her paleness gradually appeared. She looked at the empty wine glass in front of him and sighed. Since you're Zhuang Xing, you should drink some wine today. Sulu replied, ever since he died, I have never drunk alcohol provided by others. Zoyu was silent for a moment, and then said with a smile, so, you were willing to drink the wine I brought to the stall last time, which means you trust me very much. If I can't even trust you, then it's too boring. Sulu smiled and said, and as you know, I've been fighting these days. I don't want alcohol to affect my brain. He had been fighting these days. He had been fighting against the entire Federation. There was not a single second of peace and relaxation in every place. There was only the tension of life and death. Zoyu looked at him, who had obviously lost a lot of weight, and suddenly felt very sad. She raised her hand to cover her bright red lips, to hide her inner emotions, and pushed the porcelain plate with more than half of the steak left on her table to him. After Zoyu left, Sulu continued chewing the remaining steak with his head lowered. During the process, no one knew that under the beautiful and pleasant light of the Flowing Wind Slope Club, he had a lot of conversations with the Federal Central Computer in his mind. Like the many fierce quarrels in the underground sewer, the old thing still refused to provide any specific help for the plan he was about to carry out. According to the old thing, it was a serious violation of the 3 core laws if it provided detailed information and help knowing that he was going to kill one or many citizens of the Federation. Su Li's eyebrows were tightly knitted, like a flower tied by shoelaces. After sitting at the table in silence for a long time, he cursed silently and put the silver knife and fork on the table heavily, making a muffled sound. A waiter came after hearing the sound. After politely asking for instructions, he took away the extra plates and tableware for him. Right after the waiter turned around and left, there was a very small and unnoticeable chip in the place where the silver knife and fork were originally placed. Sulu smoothly grasped the chip in his palm and lifted the hood of his dark blue sports coat to cover his face. Stepping on the deliberately wet bluestone road, he walked out of the Flowing Wind Slope Club. Outside the club was the Charter Square. In the early autumn, the ginkgo leaves around the square were beginning to turn yellow. They swayed gently with the breeze, or it was more appropriate to say that they were trembling. This was the most beautiful season in the Charter Square, but there was no scene of tourists. He didn't know whether it was because the loss of the front line had made the people lose interest in sightseeing, or because of the strike these days, the people had taken back their boots that were ready for autumn. Sulu sat on the bench beside the square and lit a cigarette. He squinted his eyes and looked at the few pedestrians and the military police that were far more than the pedestrians in the square. Green smoke curled up from his fingers and then rose into the early autumn sky. He lowered his head and inserted the chip into the military watch. He carefully read the information in the chip and felt infinite emotions in his heart. It was only a short time after Zoyu left, but the Madam of Macho Back Mountain made a decision and sent the confidential information to him. The courage and terrifying execution of the Qianshi Tai family really made people feel fear. The microchip contained a confidential file from the Ministry of Justice, which did not contain any information about the military court. However, it was interesting to know which building the military court would hold a secret trial in a few days by calculating the date of the trial. This was what Sulu needed the most right now. There was a very detailed and powerful battle plan attached to the chip's file, but he was not going to use it. Although he could smell the familiar scent of this battle plan, and he knew that Zhou Yu, who was now working in the Department of National Defense's War Strategy Research Laboratory, must have contributed a lot, he would not allow his battle to be carried out under the guidance of Macho. After doing all this, Su Lu relaxed and leaned on the back of the bench. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the blue sky with a cigarette in his mouth. No one knew what he was thinking. It was very strange that no one paid attention to him, and no one came to ask him who he was, what he was looking at, and what he wanted to do. Feng Yu used his swift and fierce life to prove that he was always right. Today, it seemed that his nonsense of saying that the most dangerous place was the safest place turned out to be so correct. A few years ago, facing the most fatal threat of Lady Tai, he suppressed his anger and walked out of the Lu Feng Slope Club. He came to the Charter Square and struggled to think for a long time. Then, he made the decision to kill Macklin. A few years later, he walked out of the Lu Feng Slope Club again and came to the Charter Square. It was still that cold bench. Those people in that world were really annoying, but some things had changed a lot. For example, it was windy and snowy in the past. Today, the autumn wind was cool and refreshing. Back then, he smoked a lot of cigarettes and stuck the cigarette, but into the snow beside his feet. Today, he only smoked 2 cigarettes and didn't struggle to think. There were a lot of reasons that he couldn't understand. For example, the conversation with the president in the official residence that night had troubled him for a long time. In the end, he angrily understood the reason that Professor Shen had told him long ago. There was no reason in this universe at all. The Capitol Daily building was burned down, the frontline soldiers were dead, and Colonel Lake was going to be released. These real and vivid images made him very unhappy. The Federation's proverb often said that a hero in his 20s was often a mediocre man in his 30s. He wanted to be a hero again before he became mediocre, and then selfishly satisfy himself. As for after that, if he died cleanly, why would he need to think about the reason? The sun gradually shifted and retreated to the west. Su Lu rubbed his face that was a little numb from the wind. He stood up and looked at the new moon that had just appeared at the end of the sky. Thinking that he seemed to have forgotten the appearance of the old moon, he sighed and left the Charter Square. He followed the well-developed underground transportation network of the capital and came to a certain block. He climbed up the long and slanted stone path and bought some high-energy nutrition bars for students at the Foothill department store. He said goodbye to the back of the boss, namely Xiao Shan, and left. 40 minutes later, a quiet light lit up somewhere in the underground passageway of the capital. Sulu wore a pair of goggles and climbed up along the deep passageway. His movements were extremely gentle and did not make any sound. He was like a stray cat wandering in an abandoned mine looking for food. Using a sharp military knife to cut open the hard outer wall of the pipeline, Sulu narrowed his eyes and pulled out as many as 64 bundles of solid wires. He focused his power on his fingertips and rubbed them down forcefully. His fingers were like a hot soldering iron at the moment, and he actually rubbed the protective film of the solid wires off like paper scraps. After connecting the miniaturized workbench to the broken wires, Su Lu stared at the faintly glowing screen. He did not try to crack the security system on the ground. Instead, he tried to follow the data flow to find a numerical value to open the ground valve. He was not Gu Shifeng, nor was he Shi Qinghai, nor was he the uncle who could hack into the computer core of the Bureau of Proclamation. Theoretical physics, mathematical calculation, and computer control were his weakest links compared to these geniuses. And right now, he was reversing the data flow, so the risk of triggering the alarm of the government surveillance system was quite high. Time passed by minute. The night on the surface should be getting darker and darker, but his work progress was somewhat slow. Although the rigor of an engineer did not allow him to feel the slightest impatience, He knew in his heart that if he delayed entering the surface building until tomorrow, it was very likely that he would not be able to make it in time before the powerful government forces arrived. A drop of sweat slid down his forehead and rubbed against the edge of his half-tight sports jacket before dripping into the underground sewer. The tense atmosphere echoed in the underground tunnel that was filled with the smell of blood. Right at this moment, the voice of the Federal Central Computer rang in his mind. Gammo 2 #access control. The algorithm you have chosen is too slow. If you want to enter before dawn, I suggest that you choose to use physics to crack it. There is a tool in your workbench in the second grading. Chapter 778. With a light click, the valve at the top of the tunnel, which didn't look heavy but was definitely heavy, finally opened. Sula didn't rush out like a rookie. Although there was only a thin line between him and the rookie, he had been through hundreds of battles on the battlefield. He hung in the air, patiently waiting for the lubricating liquid to gradually moisten the spring that hadn't been rubbed for many years. At the same time, he carefully removed the traces around him and carefully recombined the pipes. He took out wet ash from his bag and deliberately smeared it on randomly. After doing all this, he slowly drilled out with the tip of his elbow against the valve above his head. After crawling through the tunnel with a small angle of nearly 60 meters, he finally came to the ground. He pushed open the door of the electrician's room inside the building with the dense green plants. Under the cover of the night, he quietly walked into the hall and used the fastest speed to look at the internal structure of the military court. He asked the old guy to temporarily replace the surveillance camera inside the court. He walked from the direction of the courtroom to the door. His footsteps were light and heavy, and he quickly determined his hiding position. The feeling of the soles of his boots was very clear. The tunnel was covered with strips of red carpet, and below it was a solid wood floor. The space below should be enough. The information given by Macho Back Mountain was detailed and accurate. Sulu lifted the carpet from the bottom of the courtroom, revealing the rough wooden floor underneath. He then took out a thin alloy wire from his backpack, threaded it into the other part of the carpet, and stepped on the bottom of his boots through the small groove at the front of the wooden floor. He lifted the wooden floor and lay down. He very methodically arranged the modified H-14 sniper rifle, the high firepower Langer pistol, and the military knife he made himself beside him. The cubicle under the floor looked like a coffin under the dim light. These cold-killing weapons seemed to be buried with the coffin. Sulu lay down calmly, took out 3 high-energy nutrition bars for students from his backpack, and ate them. He then pulled the thin alloy wire in his hand. With a soft hiss, the hard, thin alloy wire rubbed against the groove at the end of the floor and turned the wooden floor over. At the same time, it quickly pulled the rolled-up red carpet towards the courtroom. The moment before darkness arrived, Sulu looked at the landscape lights on Robbie Avenue through the wide floor-to-ceiling window in the court. He looked at the balance statue that represented the justice and fairness of the Federation's law and the heavy stone charter ceremony in the forest. He slowly narrowed his eyes. The red carpet rolled up smoothly and quickly covered the wooden floor. It returned to its original appearance, and no one could see any difference. 4 days later, this red carpet would be the road to freedom for Colonel Lake, who would be court-martialed. He would never have thought that there was someone waiting for him on this red carpet. The autumn wind was bleak, and the cold current from the direction of Linhai made the temperature of the capital city drop abruptly. Under the strong pressure of the public, Parliament Hill was forced to give in to the government, and several very important bills of President Pabre's policy were passed. Not knowing whether it was because of this or because of the sudden cold weather, the strikes in the various regions of the Federation gradually came to an end. There were fewer angry protesters on the streets of the capital city, and the people who had returned to their normal lives and work began to care about tonight's dinner and whether they should add a few extra layers of thermal underwear. The military airport in the suburbs of the capital city was also ravaged by the cold wind. The soldiers of the West Woods Special Forces on the tarmac stared at the outline of the spaceship that was gradually becoming clearer in the sky. They were nervous and heavy, and did not care about the thin military uniform they were wearing at all. The Federation forces on the front line of the Empire had suffered several heavy blows in succession, and the Westwoods troops under the 4th Military Region had suffered the greatest losses. The morale and mentality of the troops on the front line had some very dangerous changes. The troops, who were specially approved by the Federation Parliament to be stationed in the capital city many years ago, were naturally angry. Big Stick Tian, who did not have any military position but had a very high prestige in the Westwoods troops, had taken a warship to the front line of the Empire to deal with the problems of the frontline troops. He represented the West Woods to compete with the government for the right to speak. Other than him, there was no other suitable candidate. However, with the current complicated situation in the West Woods, once he left the old house in the Sunset State, who would be responsible for the safety of the little princess of the Zhong family, especially since her legal guardian was now wanted by the Federation government. The spaceship of the Gu Bell Company slowly landed on the tarmac, and the roaring engine gradually calmed down. The escort warship at the junction of the atmosphere sent a signal to the airport hull, and the people on the tarmac swarmed over. A convoy of more than a dozen dark blue luxury cars passed by the West Woods Special Forces and slowly drove to the bottom of the spaceship. The cabin door of the Gu Bell Company's spaceship opened, and Zhong Huiyin narrowed her eyes at the familiar yet strange S1 land. She walked down the escalator, carrying a small backpack on her back and still holding the old doll in her arms. The door of the dark blue luxury car opened, and Nan Xiangmei looked at the slowly approaching Zhong Huiyin with a sincere smile on her beautiful face. She said in a gentle voice, "Welcome." There was no real friendship between the families, especially between the other families of the 7 major families and the Zhong family of the Westwoods. The Zhong family had always been an unusual existence among the 7 major families. When the Federation government tried to weaken or even eliminate the Zhong family, the other major families remained silent and even joined in the feast of sharing the food with each other. The Nan family had never shown any special protection for the Westwoods, but there was real friendship between the people in the family. When Su Lu disappeared into the vast night, Mr. Tian was about to leave the Westwoods. He could only rest assured that Zhong Huiyin would be handed over to a friend he truly trusted, and he had to ensure that this friend had enough strength to protect Zhong Huiyin. Although Mr. Tian rarely saw this friend after he dropped out of the 1st Military Academy, and although this friend was a woman, and she was already someone else's wife and mother, he still absolutely trusted her. It was always easier for men to trust their first love, and the rougher the man, the more so. Therefore, he solemnly handed Zhong Huiyin over to the current Mrs. Nan, Chao Jian of the past. Facts proved that Mrs. Nan was very worthy of Mr. Tian's trust. From the interstellar voyage from the West Woods to the Capital Ring, and then to the subsequent security work, the Nan family, who had always been low-key, did not hesitate to show their strength. Before the other forces could react, they safely brought Zhong Huiyin to the Nan family's exclusive manor. After Mrs. Nan arranged the life and studies of the little princess of the Zhong family, she handed the responsibility of taking care of the little girl to her daughter. She believed that her excellent and kind daughter would definitely take good care of the poor and lonely little princess who had lost her parents and guardian. From the details of life in the manor, Nan Xiangmei and Zhong Huiyin did get along very well. In the middle of the night, the 2 girls, who were very different in age, were still holding a pillow and chatting with relish. "I like your character. You're very gentle, and you're very delicate. You don't have the lethality that makes people hate you." Zhong Huiyin stared at Nan Xiangmei with her bright, gem-like eyes. She brushed her hair aside and stared at Nan Xiangmei beside her, saying, "Jiansha, and Zhou, you look too lethal, so I don't like them." Nan Xiangmei frowned and looked at the little girl beside her with mixed feelings. In the face of such a mature conversation, she did not know how to answer and even felt inexplicably shy. But so far, I still like Shang Qiu more. Zhong Huiyin retracted her bare legs under the brand new nightgown and said seriously, "So, you have to please me more." Nan Xiangmei finally couldn't help but laugh. She covered her mouth and whispered, "Why should I please you? He's my guardian. If he wants to get together with his wife, he has to ask for my opinion." Zhong Yin cutely wrinkled her nose and sighed with an adult tone. "Of course, if I were a few years older, I would definitely not agree with any of them." Nan Xiangmei held the pillow and tried hard to hold back her laughter. Her shoulders kept twitching. After a long while, she calmed down and said, "He's now a fugitive. I don't know where he is. I don't know how he eats, if he sleeps well, if he's safe. By the way, do you care that Su Lu is a fugitive?" Zhong Huiyin asked curiously. "Shouldn't you call him brother?" Nan Xiangmei was paying attention to another question. "I call him that in front of him, but I like to call him by his name behind his back." Zhong Huiyin smiled sweetly and said, "Don't tell him in the future. By the way, answer my question just now." Nan Xiangmei quietly leaned against the soft pillow. Her black hair flowed down like a quiet river. She said in a trance, "Of course not. What about you?" "Me?" Zhong Huiyin seemed to have heard the funniest question. Her eyes curved into two lovely crescent moons as she pointed her nose and said, "When I met him, he was already a fugitive." "How old were you at that time?" Nan Xiangmei asked curiously. 5 years old. Zhong Huiyin explained seriously, "But I haven't forgotten anything." In the quiet manner, on the soft bed, in the peaceful night, the big girl and the little girl were talking in the middle of the night. In the corner of the room, the old doll was looking at the starry sky. In a very ordinary apartment in the Capital Special District, there was a room that was lit until late at night. It seemed to be brighter than the stars in the night sky. Bai Yulan sat by the window and squinted at the stars in the night sky. The window was half open, and the smoke of the 37 brand cigarette between his fingers came out through the gap. The bedroom door was pushed open. His wife woke up from her sleep and rubbed her eyes. She looked at him by the window and asked, "Why aren't you sleeping? I have an early shift tomorrow." The Army General Hospital was very strict with attendance management. She didn't want to be criticized by those supervisors, so she was in a bad mood. After seeing the cigarette between Bai Yulan's fingers, her mood was even worse. Bai Yulan was awakened and subconsciously threw the cigarette out of the window. She looked at her slightly bulging belly and apologized. "I'm sorry, I was thinking about something, so..." Pregnant women generally had a bad temper, not to mention the female nurse who dared to scold Su Lu directly. But she felt that Bai Yulan's mood was indeed a little strange tonight. She walked to the window and asked what happened. Bai Yulan quickly closed the window to block the cold wind. She stepped forward and gently hugged her waist that had become a little thicker. After a moment of silence, she explained, "There is a very stupid guy who may need my help." Chapter 779. The body of the woman in his arms was still soft at first, but it gradually stiffened. She thought of the words he said in the hospital room, the details after marriage, the strange soldiers that appeared in the Army General Hospital, and the thick bag of money that was still in the drawer. She pushed Bai Yulan away and said in a panic, You are really from Group 7, then the stupid guy you were talking about. Is he Su Lu?" Bai Yulan looked at his wife calmly and said gently, "I thought you already knew, although I have retired from the army. That guy is still my comrade. And at the same time, he is also my boss." After returning from the front lines, he was like an ordinary man without any sharp past, doing the work of a stay-at-home husband. However, after that incident, whether it was going to the black market to buy chicken or cutting broccoli in the kitchen, he was always waiting for a call from someone, an order. However, even when the broccoli was softened by the boiling water, the phone still did not ring, and there was no order. He did not even know where that guy was hiding and what he was preparing to do. From what he knew, that guy was definitely preparing to do something very big, but he could not find the opportunity to participate. Bai Yulan looked at his wife's worried and panicked expression calmly, and his eyes lowered slightly, landing on her slightly bulging stomach. He gently stroked it with his right hand and said in a low voice, "I promise you, as long as the boss does not look for me, I will not leave you." 7 giant Federation battleships left the Huang, E Galaxy, and headed for planet Emohua. The federal forces suffered an unprecedented heavy blow on that planet, and these giant battleships carried the hope of a counterattack and the confidence of victory, especially the main battleship. The 17th Armored Division of the 1st Military Region was on that main battleship because of its valiance and cunning to continue its undefeated glory. Because of the order from the highest level of the Federation government and the military, the 17th Division ended its rest in the capital ring early and returned to the front lines filled with blood and death. For this transfer order, the outside world usually thought that it was because the front lines urgently needed troops for victory, but for Commander Chung Hai and all the officers of the 17th Division, there was a hidden reason behind it that made them unhappy. However, compared to enduring the pressure of political intrigue in the capital ring, the troops were probably more willing to go to the front lines and fight the Empire with real swords and spears. Furthermore, before the troops left, the 17th Division had forcibly taken back the dozen or so Team 7 members they had captured. The blue background of the universe appeared on the large porthole. The body of the spaceship that had just finished traveling through the warp hole was still warm. Xiong Lin Quan leaned against the slightly hot metal wall, frowned with a cigarette in his mouth, and looked at the scenery outside. But in his mind, he was thinking about the moon in the Capital Special District. Times are pressing and can force a man to become a cripple, and can also force a rough man to become a sentimental poet, especially when they find that they are powerless against many things, even anger. It is difficult for them to develop any other emotion except for lament and melancholy. Many soldiers of the 17th Division were squatting or standing in the corners of the battleship. Some of them were members of the 17th Division, while others were officers from the training base. Commander He snatched the cigarette from Xiong's mouth, lit up his own coarse tobacco, and said in a somewhat muffled voice, "I wonder how the instructor is right now." Xiong Lin Quan spat fiercely, took the cigarette, and said, "I've never seen a guy as fierce as the boss. Even if he has to fight against the entire Federation, nothing will happen to him. Nothing will happen to him." In fact, what these men who were rushing to the battlefield wanted to say was, "Nothing can happen to him. He hasn't contacted me, but I can imagine his situation. But I think he should have contacted you. Although I am not happy about this, I still beg you to tell me where he is right now." A special guest had come to the independent villa in the West Mountain compound today. Ever since Zhou Yingxing had been temporarily suspended from his position as Minister of Defense, this villa had become abnormally quiet, so not many people screamed and lost their composure because of this special guest. As for Zhou Yu, she would never lose her composure because of another woman. Zhou Yu gently adjusted the red flower arrangement on the table, her expression calm. She didn't even look at the person opposite her, as if she didn't recognize that the person sitting in front of her was the national idol who was popular throughout the entire universe. "I can't understand your unhappiness, and I don't understand what position you are in to ask me about his whereabouts." She lowered her head and seriously cut the flower, saying softly, "If I'm not mistaken, you are from the Lees of Philadelphia, and the person who wants to kill him right now is General Li Jiedu. I am from the Li family, and Li Jiedu is my cousin." Jian Shui took off the hood of her windbreaker. Her black ponytail bounced out and swayed. Her beautiful face revealed an inexplicable sense of pride. "But I'm more than that. I'm his fiancée." Zhou Yu's hand that was holding the special flower scissors froze slightly, and then she smiled and replied, "So you are questioning me with this identity, but I don't think you can really get married." She raised her head and looked at Jian Shui's impeccable face, exclaiming in her heart. She calmly said, "You two are too dazzling. If you two really get together, the eyes of the Creator will go blind from jealousy." Jian Shui's gaze moved from the red flower arrangement on the table to the big red flower in Zhou Yu's hair. After a moment of silence, she said, "You are very beautiful and dazzling." "Thank you for the compliment," Zhou Yu calmly replied. "Regarding Su Li's life, you have participated enough." Jian Shui suddenly smiled charmingly, and her eyes twinkled. She didn't look like a star, but just a sly actress. "If you continue to participate, I don't know if the creator will be jealous, but I will be. Zoe slowly put down the flower scissors, raised her head, and looked at the other quietly, not saying a word. One was a former national idol, a male creature that had once charmed the entire universe. The other was a lady in red, a powerful male creature that had once charmed Li Feng and Li Xiaodong. At this moment, sitting calmly opposite each other, the bright red flower between them suddenly lost its color. I don't know where he is now, but as I said just now, since the creator chose to make him dazzling, then he won't die so easily. Zoe smiled and said, although he still has a lot of secrets that I believe you and I don't know, I believe that with those secrets, no one in the Capital Special District can easily kill him. Jianshe was silent for a long time, then looked at her calmly and said, I'm here today because of one thing. If you can see him, please tell him. Li Feng is back. The military spaceport in the suburbs of the capital was responsible for accepting extremely secret missions for 2 consecutive days. After the landing of the spaceship from the West Woods the day before, another light warship broke through the autumn clouds and landed at a high speed in an almost domineering manner. The wind swept through the tarmac at high speed, rolling up countless green and yellow leaves and hitting the ground crew soldiers with a crackling sound. The surface of this light warship was extremely dirty. The surface of the warship that was basically used for vacuum missions was actually covered with greasy dust. It could be imagined that before this warship received the order to return, it must have been carrying out a military mission on a planet on the front line. The edge of the engine cluster armor at the back of the warship's abdomen was even scorched by the Empire's Standard missiles. Seeing this detail, the soldiers at the spaceport were extremely shocked. What kind of urgent mission did this warship bring back? They didn't even have time to repair such heavy damage and actually took such a huge risk to cross countless light years to return at high speed. The somewhat deformed cabin door was forcibly pushed open by hydraulic machinery, and a burly Federation colonel walked out. His footsteps were unusually steady, and there was no expression on his young and handsome face. However, anyone who saw him seemed to be able to feel a terrifying and violent aura, as if this person wanted to, he could tear down the cabin wall of the warship at any time and use it as a knife to chop off countless people's heads. The officers from the Ministry of National Defense, who came to receive them, came forward. They could clearly feel that this colonel, who was known to be invincible in the military, was in a very bad mood, so no one dared to say anything unnecessary. They directly took out the electronic document signed by Mr. President and General Li Jiedu and handed it over to him, asking him to sign it. Li Feng stared at his father's signature on the electronic document, which was as disciplined and strict as ever. Suddenly, he frowned, and an extremely cold light burst out from his slightly sunken eye sockets due to the long journey. After signing his name on the electronic document, he fiercely stabbed the electronic pen into the screen. The screen shattered into pieces, and the pen tip, which was not sharp at all, stabbed deeply into General Li Jiedu's signature. The autumn wind blew, and Li Feng strode to the dark green military vehicle. With a gloomy face, he pulled the driver out of the vehicle and threw him more than 10 meters away. Then he stepped on the gas pedal and rushed out of the spaceport. 5 minutes later, the dark green military vehicle roared and arrived at a military building 40 kilometers away. The military vehicle did not slow down. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the military police, it directly broke the alloy pole at the gate. Then, accompanied by the ear-splitting screech of the brakes and the smell of burnt tires, the vehicle stopped in front of the stone steps. The officers of the Special Guard Regiment of the 1st Military Region tried to stop him from breaking into the general's office. Li Feng's face turned livid, and he directly kicked them. The terrifying iron leg was like a missile, and no one dared to stop it. The officers all tried to avoid it. So the hard soles of the boots directly kicked on the hard door, and the door was shattered into pieces. The force splashed in all directions, and the officers all had a few more wounds on their bodies. Li Jiedu, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Federation, took off his glasses in confusion. Looking at the violent scene in front of the door and then at his son, he frowned and said unhappily, "I'm very happy that you can come back so soon. But as a soldier, when will you change your violent temperament? If your grandfather was still alive, he would be very disappointed to see you like this." Li Feng looked at his father, who was still as handsome as before, and his heart, which had been violent since he was 12 years old, suddenly felt very sad. He roared with a hoarse voice, "If my grandfather was still alive, he would definitely kill you with his own hands." Chapter 780. The two sentences were exchanged in an instant. The father and son understood a lot of things at the same time. Li Feng finally understood why the man called Silent Tiger would insist on keeping a distance from the outside world, especially in front of Fei Cheng. Li Zidao, on the other hand, quickly grasped the source of Li Feng's anger. He was shocked to find out that Li Feng had such a deep relationship with the man who died on the ancient bell. Li Feng didn't ask his father what the big explosion of the ancient bell had to do with him because he knew it was useless. He just looked at him with extremely complicated emotions. Li Jiedu didn't explain anything and just looked at Li Feng calmly. His thin and strong fingers subconsciously knocked on the smooth surface of the desk. Li Feng took a deep breath. His burly body was full of masculinity. He frowned and stared, and said in a voice like steel grinding, "I left Philadelphia for the Westwoods when I was 12 years old. When I was growing up, there was a strong man in front of me. I'll learn from him and try to catch up and even surpass him. I never thought that such a strong man would die because of such a disgusting conspiracy, so I was very angry." Li Jiedu looked at his son silently and slightly raised his eyebrows to catch his real emotions. He said leisurely, "I'm your father. Now I want him to be my father." Li Feng's eyes seemed to be burning. He stared at his father behind the desk with extremely complicated feelings. Li Jiedu slowly closed his hands and looked at the wrinkles between his fingers with his head slightly tilted. He seemed to be digesting the heavy, psychological blow given to him by his most proud son. After a while, he looked up and stopped the argument about the ancient bell and the tiger with great wisdom and decisiveness. He said indifferently, without any expression on his face, "You should have seen the order signed by Mr. President and me. Then get ready to fight." "Fight?" Li Feng's voice became sharp, and the violent masculinity unique to young men suddenly turned into deep mockery and sorrow. He looked at his father behind the table and said with a hoarse voice, "For the sake of forcing the warship to land on Mo Hua planet, many of the reinforcements on the ground died. In the end, I received the order to turn back immediately. I should be on that planet right now, fighting to the death with that Empire's princess, but you want me to return to this disgusting land to fight Sulu? This is not my battlefield, and this is not my battle." Li Feng slowly put on his military cap, and he prepared to leave this room that made it difficult for him to breathe. "I'm not asking you as a father." General Li Jiedu looked at his son's silhouette expressionlessly. His voice was emotionless. "I am ordering you as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Federation and as the commander of the 1st Military Region." He stood up from behind the table, his entire person calm and sharp like an icicle that had been dormant for many years. "Colonel Li Feng, remember your identity. You are a soldier." Li Feng's tall and sturdy body suddenly tensed up. His youthful face, which was full of violent emotions, suddenly twitched. At this moment, he mobilized the terrifying power in his body to control his emotions. However, a moment later, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he began to laugh in a somewhat neurotic manner. He turned around to look at his father, and with an innocent and strange smile, he said, "I agree." Looking at the broken office door, staring at the ground after Li Feng left, Li Jiedu's expression was calm, and he did not let his subordinate see any problems. However, in his heart, he was already extremely vigilant, and there was even a faint sense of regret. He was vigilant that the Westwoods tiger had such a great influence on Li Feng outside of Philadelphia's notice. Although the tiger was dead, This influence had continued to this day, so he had to admit that he might have made a very unforgivable mistake by transferring his son back from the front line to deal with Sulu. In addition to these emotions, Lee Jae-doo's heart also had a very faint sense of sadness. The so-called middle age was the beginning of old age. Li Feng's words about his father had successfully stabbed him after all, but it didn't matter. After he picked up the phone and ordered the reduction of Colonel Li Feng's command authority, he thought silently, it really didn't matter. One day, you will know that I am right. Everyone will have to admit that they are right, and that day will come soon. The building complex on the west side of Robbie Avenue was heavily guarded. Today, there were no big shots coming to visit, and there were no important cases to be heard. The agents with serious expressions walking through the Stone Charter ceremony and the Statue of the Balance were carrying out a routine security check. But today's check was particularly strict. Then, a group of field troops in armored military vehicles came to the judge's court for the second round of security check. These elite soldiers under the Iron 7th Division expressionlessly asked the agents of the Federation Investigation Bureau, who had just finished their work, to leave the relevant area. As for the bailiffs who were originally in charge of the security work, they had long disappeared. The Iron 7th Division sent a reinforced company. More than 100 elite soldiers were divided into 3 groups. They carefully and fastidiously checked the security facilities everywhere, including the underground passage under the court. The soldiers checked the dark and wet walls of the passage almost centimeter by centimeter, especially the valves that led to the ground. When they confirmed that there were no traces of intrusion, they put up a seal made of polymer material and responsibly signed their names. More than a dozen soldiers in the courtroom were carefully probing every corner with a battlefield life detection device. The red-carpeted passage had been probed countless times during the inspection process. As for the possible hiding places, they had even used engineering nails to create a strong physical blockade. Around the courtyard outside the building, the reinforced soldiers of the Iron 7 Division had set up 4 barricades that extended for nearly 300 meters. Between the lush trees further away, the infrared sensors had also started working. When a leaf was blown off by the autumn wind, there would be a beeping sound to eliminate the abnormality. At this point, the military court had been completely inspected. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division had confirmed that the inside was clean. If someone tried to break in from the outside on the day of the trial, they would have to face the most efficient firepower barricade of the federal forces. The tall floor-to-ceiling windows welcomed the light of the clear autumn day. The mottled lights scattered on the red carpet, making the passage from the courtroom to the door look like an abstract painting full of strange lines and blocks of color. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were on high alert both inside and outside the building naturally did not know that under the passage that had just been scanned countless times, there was a person whose breathing had become extremely slow. His skin temperature had even dropped by a lot, making him look like a strange stone. No matter how great a war was, it was impossible to determine victory or defeat through a single battle. It was always pacing back and forth between attack and retreat, not to mention the war between the Federation government and the 7 great families that had been going on for tens of thousands of years, and perhaps would go on forever. The great strike that had shaken countless galaxies had ended. The anger of hundreds of millions of people forced the Parliament Hill, which was secretly controlled by the 7 great families, to concede to the president and the government and pass several very important bills. However, the Federation government and the president himself knew very well that the 7 great families with astonishing hidden influence would absolutely not be willing to accept defeat. They had already mentally and materially prepared for the other side's crazy counterattack. However, to the Federation government's surprise, after the Great Strike, the 7 great families maintained a strange silence. The Zhong family of the West Woods that had fallen into discord was temporarily out of the picture. In the past few days, other than the Nan Xiang family announcing that they had taken over the protection of the Zhong family's little princess, nothing else important had happened. This silence was very strange and very dangerous. The 7 great families seemed to be waiting for something to happen, waiting for some kind of opportunity to strike and kill. The government easily linked the silence of the 7 great families to the disappearance of Su Lu. An uneasy sense of urgency reverberated through various agencies and departments. The Federation Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Proclamation, and the related strategic research laboratories all began to operate at high speed. They had to calculate what the 7 great families were waiting for, or, to put it more directly, where was Colonel Su Li's target? Early in the morning, there was a drizzle of autumn rain, making the entire capital city cold and wet. Then there was a sudden gust of wind, blowing the light yellow leaves into the puddles on the streets, struggling to stay afloat. President Pabre stood on the balcony of his official residence with a deep frown. Chui Zedong stood on the balcony of the Bureau of Proclamation with a numb expression. Li Jiedu stood on the balcony with a calm expression. Like the elders of the 7 great families hiding behind the wind and rain, they looked at the autumn wind and rain in silence. On the lakeside balcony at the back of Macho Mountain, Lady Tai, wearing a light velvet windbreaker, silently looked at the dense rain circles on the lake and said softly, "Call our old friends again. It should be more peaceful these days. That young man clearly doesn't want us to be too deeply involved." Shunli stood behind Lady Tai and said with a frown, "According to your suggestion, Mr. Zion is already sick. But the information provided by the Foundation includes 15 valid targets, including the President's official residence. I can't judge which one Colonel Su Lu will choose." "No need to guess," Lady Tai said. "This is his battle, not ours." The big shots stood on the balcony and looked at the autumn wind and rain, but they didn't know where the violent wind and rain would fall in the next moment. The number 2 figure of Green Dragon Mountain, Jean Xiaoda, was going to visit the Special Capital District tomorrow. At such a sensitive time, this most important leader of the anti-government army, after the leader of Nanshui, still received a warm welcome from the Federation government. The planned welcome ceremony was extremely grand. The Federation's Vice President Byron had died under the gun of Shi Qinghai. According to the principle of political equality, the one who was supposed to greet Mr. Jean Xiaoda at the spaceport should have been Vice President Zion of the Federation Parliament. However, Vice President Zion proposed to the official residents that he couldn't attend because of his poor health. Half an hour later, Vice President Zion suddenly said that he would attend the welcome ceremony at the spaceport. After receiving this somewhat strange news, President Pabre left the balcony with a calm expression. General Li Jiedu stood on the balcony and took a phone call with a smile. In the building painted with the small eye pattern, there was an excited shout. "Target confirmed. Su Lu will appear at the spaceport." Chapter 781. Only by understanding the enemy could one defeat the enemy. The Small Eyes unit gathered the best talents from various agencies of the Federation. They also had authority that normal departments could not imagine. The members even knew from the beginning that Su Lu had a strange connection with the Federal Central Computer. As for Su Li's information and files from childhood, they had already studied them thoroughly. The more he researched, the more he realized that Su Lu, who looked very ordinary in appearance and temperament, had a shocking past and terrifying strength. With the continuous setbacks of the pursuit, Small Eyes troops were beginning to be filled with a negative atmosphere of disappointment. They were becoming less and less confident in capturing or killing Su Lu, and they were not even sure what the other's next target would be. Knowing which direction the wind was blowing had always been the most difficult thing to do. Fortunately, at this time, the seemingly insignificant arrangement of Deputy Speaker Xin ignited the rapidly active cells in their brain. This politician, who was strongly supported by Mao Chou, revealed some very useful information in this detail. If Su Lu, who was hiding in the dark, wanted to make a big move, he would definitely cooperate with the big families that were trying to fight against the government. The analysts in the Small Eyes unit firmly believed this, because in their opinion, no matter how strong an individual was, It was impossible to be stupid enough to fight against the entire machine of the Federation alone, let alone someone like Colonel Sulu, who had a rational engineer's mind. And according to their analysis, the most important reason for Su Li's anger was betrayal, and the committee member Jean Xiaoda, who was going to visit the Capital Special District, was the person behind the Green Dragon Mountain Central Committee's decision to betray Shi Qinghai. An insignificant change in detail and the support of the personality analysis, they came to the most firm conclusion. Su Li's target was the second person of Green Dragon Mountain at the spaceport in 2 days. 2 days later, the spaceship from S2 slowly landed at the spaceport of the capital. The spaceship that was cleaned on the Old Moon base sparkled under the autumn sun, and it contrasted with the flashing, welcoming words on the giant holographic screen in front of the spaceport. Jean Xiaoda looked through the porthole at the grand, welcoming crowd on the tarmac, as well as the Federation government officials at the front of the crowd, and frowned imperceptibly. Such a small action seemed to cause some discomfort between his eyebrows. He roughly dipped his finger into the cup, dipped it in the scalding tea, and smeared it on his eyebrows. His eyebrows that were stained with tea glittered, just like his hair that was combed until it was shiny. No one could tell that this big shot in the anti-government army, who was nearly 70 years old, was wearing an expensive wig. It was said that the capital city had not been very peaceful recently, but the old man was not worried. The Federation government had to be responsible for his safety. As for the rumored bait, he laughed mockingly. He and Xiao Qiudao had been fighting for decades, and in the end, he had lived longer and won in the end. Now that the detestable intelligence chief was dead, who could beat him? A female staff member walked over, bent down, and reported to him the following arrangements, as well as the relevant etiquette requirements after leaving the spaceport. This female staff member of Green Dragon Mountain was the closest subordinate of Jean Xiaoda. She was in her early 30s, and her face was beautiful. It was the most seductive period of her life. When she bent down, her collar extended outwards, naturally revealing her soft white skin, which was very charming. Jean Xiaoda smiled as he looked at the spring scenery under her collar. He did not hide the pleasure and greed in his eyes. Probably because she felt his gaze, this female staff member subconsciously reached out her hand to cover her chest. Then she realized something, looked at him nervously, and moved her hand away in panic. "Don't be afraid of anything." Jean Xiaoda laughed like an ordinary old man, and then his expression suddenly became serious. He said, "Only those who are not loyal to the organization and do not obey the orders of the superiors are the targets of our struggle." Although this female staff member had been serving Mr. Jean for 3 years, every time she saw this leader who was famous for his cruel internal cleansing in Green Dragon Mountain, she still could not get rid of her nervousness and fear. She especially did not know if her subconscious action of covering her chest would make Mr. Jean severely criticize her for having too much rotten consciousness. Sometimes, it is better for a woman to be a little shy. Committee member Jean laughed as he stood up and walked toward the hatch of the spaceship. Perhaps it was because this was how he felt earlier, or perhaps it was because there was a grand welcome ceremony waiting for her on the tarmac. But the female staff member didn't feel any anger at all. The closer he got to the cabin door, the calmer Jean Xiaoda's expression was, and the more determined his eyes were, the more he looked like a revolutionary leader that people were used to seeing. As the person in charge of the strict education in Green Dragon Mountain in the 54th year of the constitutional calendar, Mr. Jean Xiaoda had always been known for his decisiveness, and this temperament directly contributed to his trip to the capital. In his opinion, with the outbreak of war, with the empire and the gradual implementation of the Great Reconciliation Agreement, the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain were gradually being marginalized in the social system of the Federation. To be more precise, Green Dragon Mountain no longer had any future, so he had to seize the time to choose a new ship before this big ship sank. He was already 72 years old, but he did not want to die. He still wanted to continue to have power. He liked the feeling of controlling the life and death of others. But just like Schiller's masterpiece said, when two sides were at war, the officials could surrender, but the emperor could not. The leader of Nan Shui would never surrender to the government of the Federation, so he had no choice but to surrender. No, Mr. Jean Xiaoda solemnly looked at the slowly opening cabin door and listened to the faint sound of military music. He firmly thought in his heart, "This is not surrender, but cooperation. Why should you be the emperor?" The old man thought of his partner of many years, the leader of Nan Shui, and indignantly thought. However, the shadow of fear had long occupied the depths of his heart. In the past few decades in Green Dragon Mountain, the name of Nan Shui was like an omnipresent shadow that shrouded everyone. The cabin door slowly opened, and the refreshing and unfamiliar wind of the capital city blew into his face. Mr. Jean Xiaoda put on a somewhat forced smile and walked down. At this moment, he suddenly realized that only by leaving Green Dragon Mountain and coming to this area where Nan Shui could not influence, could he truly feel the happiness of not being afraid. The red carpet stretched to the end of the hall. Mr. Jean Xiaoda and the vice chairman of Zion warmly shook hands, then hugged each other, and then exchanged small gifts. There were also cute children who sent fresh flowers to each other. According to the ancient tradition, the image of white doves flying in the air was played on a huge hologram. The military band began to play the traditional country music of Mr. Jean Xiaoda's hometown, S3 Gunzhou. The jubilant welcome ceremony seemed to be going on very normally. Ordinary people and officials could not feel the strange and tense atmosphere around the airport at all. Only the parties who were possible targets and the combat forces responsible for setting up the ambush circle could really smell the dry and tense wind and hear the sound of the string getting tighter and tighter in the autumn wind. Mr. Jean Xiaoda entered the bulletproof car. There were still no gunshots, no explosions, and no accidents. From time to time, the snipers who occupied the high positions reported the situation in the command system. The two words safe and clean were constantly exchanged. The emergency door of the airport's barbed wire fence had already been opened. A team of silent federal forces was guarding the outside. As long as there was an accident, they could rush in with the cooperation of countless snipers in the shortest time possible, find the target, and kill him. This newly formed action force, under the command of Small, was obviously different from ordinary special forces. From their equipment, it could be seen that these soldiers did not completely rely on long-range weapons. They seemed to be more proficient in close-range combat, such as high-powered submachine guns and stilettos. When these soldiers' seemingly ordinary bodies faintly exerted force under the thin material of their military uniforms, the lines of their muscles could be clearly seen moving. It was hard to imagine what kind of amazing power was hidden under these thin military uniforms. At this time, Li Feng was standing beside a dark green military vehicle dozens of meters away, looking at these guys with cold eyes. 2 days ago, he had lost his command authority, but for some strange reason, the military did not restrict him from moving with Small Eye's combat force. Betting on my military discipline and sense of honor, more than my hatred for you guys? Li Feng thought silently, then turned his attention back to the soldiers. He had never liked Su Lu, but he did not want this guy to die for some very disgusting reason. Looking at these tough soldiers, Li Feng began to worry about Su Li's safety, which was rare for him. He was very familiar with these soldiers, or rather, he was very familiar with the special temperament and strength of these soldiers, because when he was very young, he also trained in the Philadelphia Training Hall. These soldiers were all from Philadelphia, and they were all valiant figures who had been trained in the Body Cultivation Hall. People like them were often hired by big families as bodyguards, such as Li Xiaodong's brother Zheng and Lin Dohai's Kong Wu. Li Feng licked his lips, and his eyes showed a violent emotion. The federal military had sent out the real elites. Could that guy withstand it? Inside the independent building, the members of Small Eye's command center had a nervous and anxious look on their faces. The gunshots on the spaceport had not sounded for a long time, which made the string in their hearts extremely tight. They had begun to believe that the seemingly foolproof judgment was actually just a mistake. Then, where was Su Lu at this time? And what was he going to do? Reporting back all targets. The high-ranking official of the Federation Investigation Bureau wiped the sweat on his forehead and roared angrily. "Where the hell is that guy?" With the sound of the system reporting back, the people in the room confirmed that the president's residence, the Bureau of Proclamation, the 1st Military Region Headquarters, and the military court were all safe. The more than 20 suspicious targets of the Federation government agencies reported back that there were no abnormalities. The security of the agencies jointly undertaken by the Capitol Police Division and the Iron 7th Division had not been challenged at the moment. Activate the second bait. The official walked in front of the light screen and ordered the members in a deep voice, "Pick up Colonel Lake at the military court and immediately take him to the prearranged residence. The intelligence team will send the address of the residence to Macho Back Mountain as soon as possible." If Sulu did not choose Jean Xiaoda, then he was most likely to choose Lake. Since the military court was clean, then they would kill him on the road or in that residence. Chapter 782. The slender high-heeled shoes slid across the red carpet and landed on the wooden floor, making a clicking sound. It sounded like someone was knocking on a door. Sulu, who was under the wooden floor, slowly opened his eyes and woke up. There was no light in his eyes, and the narrow space was filled with darkness. He could faintly hear voices coming from above, so he knew that the court was about to start. He had been lying quietly in the dark and narrow space for 4 days and 4 nights without food or water. If he knew that Nan Xiangmei was worried about him in the manner, he would definitely tell her that he didn't eat or sleep well these days. The true power that he had broken through in the Imperial Hospital ushered in the most difficult test. The power, or true qi, that flowed slowly in his muscles and body without any obstacles, miraculously helped him slow down the frequency of his heartbeat and breathing. His metabolism entered a state similar to hibernation or deep sleep. After waking up, every muscle in his body slowly relaxed. Even the smooth muscles that couldn't be controlled by the brain also relaxed. His breathing and heartbeat began to return to normal. The footsteps above the darkness became more and more frequent, and the voices became louder and louder. Sulu squinted his eyes very hard. He looked into the darkness, but through the surveillance camera in the corner of the court-martial, he could clearly see everything in the hall. This feeling of being completely separated from his body was very strange. It was as if he was looking down at some lowly existence from above. Sulu didn't like this feeling, but he needed a line of sight. In fact, in order to obtain the surveillance footage of the court-martial, he had countless fierce disputes with the Federal Central Computer in the dark. The modified H-14 sniper rifle was on his left shoulder, the high-firepower Langer pistol was on his right, and the military knife he made himself was on his left calf. After 4 days and 4 nights with his slightly warm body, it was no longer cold, and the target he wanted to kill was on the floor. The court-martial was very quiet. There weren't many people participating in this secret trial. In addition to the military and government representatives, 2 representatives of the Zhong family from the West Woods were invited. However, the 2 middle-aged men obviously didn't have any negative opinions about the explosion of the antique bell. In the current situation, they relied on the support of the Federation government, so it was impossible for them to have any negative opinions. Su Songzi calmly looked at the case file on the table. Minister Zhou was suspended, and the situation had changed drastically. She and her colleagues, who belonged to the legal department of the Ministry of National Defense, already knew that today's secret trial was just a formality. However, she insisted on being the main controller and wore her most beautiful green dress. She got up and walked to the control panel. Her beautiful slender heels stepped on the floor and made a clicking sound. It sounded like she was knocking on the door, but also like some kind of countdown time machine. Su Songzi slightly bowed to the high courtroom and ignored the people in the gallery. She calmly looked at the accused wearing a strapless military uniform and said calmly, "Colonel Lake, you are accused of participating in a murder case in the 67th year of the Constitution and illegally stealing the secret data of the Bureau of Proclamation in the 69th year of the Constitution. You are accused of illegally stealing and leaking important data of the Federation. You are accused of destroying the Federation's first-class aircraft, endangering public safety by dangerous means, and violating the Federation's military data regulations. There was no evidence to be presented, nor was there any court debate. The trial today didn't need any witnesses. Su Songzi sadly lowered her head and quietly pressed the thick file. Then she took a deep breath, raised her head, and continued calmly. I will accuse you of intending to subvert the Federation. I will accuse you of collaborating with the enemy. I will accuse you of treason. I will accuse you of murdering the commander of the Federation's West Woods military region, Zhong Su, and his wife, as well as 1372 Federation soldiers on board in the 70th year of the Constitution. I will ask the military court to sentence you to 7 death sentences to be shot. Just like the hearing half a year ago in the building opposite the official residence, Su Songzi repeated the stormy and severe accusations of that day. However, her tone was much calmer today because she only insisted on stating the charges. She didn't expect to receive a fair trial at all. Colonel Lake, standing in the dock, didn't argue, nor did he roar angrily like he did that day. He calmly looked at Su Songzi, and there was even a faint trace of mockery on his face. The military court trial ended abruptly. The judge declared Colonel Lake not guilty on the pretext that there wasn't enough evidence and released him in court. No one in the courtroom was surprised by this result, including Su Songzi and the officers from the legal department of the Ministry of Defense. They couldn't even show their anger in front of people. They could only pack up the case file and walk out of the courtroom along the red-carpeted corridor. At that moment, Su Songzi felt that the red carpet under her high heels seemed to become extremely wet, as if it was soaked in countless amounts of blood. The people who came to watch the trial left the military court one by one. Their expressions were either calm or tired, but in short, they all had a sense of righteousness. No one expressed anger or sadness about today's shameful trial. In order to prevent the crowded and chaotic entrance from being used by the dangerous person lurking in the dark, a division of the Iron 7th Division that was specifically in charge of security today asked Colonel Lake to stay at the end of the courtroom. A few minutes later, the courtroom had become much emptier. Colonel Lake, who was handcuffed by the bailiff, smiled and shook hands with several government officials. He then received a brand new military uniform and put it on carefully. He believed that before long, there would be a dazzling gold star on the shoulder of this military uniform. Stepping on the bright red carpet with his shiny black shoes, Colonel Lake took a deep breath and suppressed the complicated and inexplicable emotions in his heart. He gently pressed down the hair fluttering under the brim of his military cap with 4 fingers and stepped out of the courtroom. The bulletproof car team stopped at the bottom of the stone steps. The elite soldiers from the Iron 7th Division vigilantly watched the periphery. As long as he walked out of the courtroom, he would usher in a new life. As for the past glory or sin, it would only be the proof of his firm belief. A smile full of confidence, perseverance, calmness, and even beginning to appear elegant appeared on Colonel Lake's face. He embarked on the path of a new life. At this moment, the red-carpeted road suddenly changed shape and bulged in front of Colonel Lake. It was as if an incredible micro-movement of the Earth's crust was taking place in this military court. The terrifying power of the deformed road turned the hard wooden floor under the carpet into countless pieces of debris. The red carpet on top was directly torn into countless pieces of tattered cloth that fluttered in the air, looking very much like the tattered clothes of the soldiers who had died on the battlefield. No one could react in time. Except for Colonel Lake himself, the people inside and outside the courtroom had no time to see this frightening scene. The torn red rags made a hissing sound and hit Colonel Lake's body and face. The pain was like countless shiny slaps. In the shadows of the rags, Su Li's figure appeared. He held the high-powered Langer pistol in his hand and directly pressed it against Lake's jaw, which had not fully opened yet. In this chaotic scene, Lake's eyes widened. He recognized the face in front of him. In fact, he was probably the first person in the federal military to know Su Lo. He also clearly felt the hardness of the gun muzzle on his jaw. In fact, many years ago, he had fiercely aimed at the person in front of him with a hard gun barrel. The gun barrel against his jaw was not cold, but it was so cold when it was about to come. There was absolutely no accident. The pieces of the red carpet flew all over the sky, right in front of his eyes, and occupied all his vision. It was like the blood on the battlefield, the blood of his comrades. In the moment before death, Colonel Lake seemed to see the grandest and most shameless fireworks. He saw the West Woods soldiers running and screaming on the ancient bell. He saw the face he wanted to forget but could not remember the most, the thin and charming face of the commander. At this moment, he wanted to say something, perhaps to repent. His voice was hoarse. Sulu was no stranger to Colonel Lake. It was this person and the mecha unit he led that ended his life as an orphan repairman. In fact, from a certain point of view, his escape and the things he did in this universe were all related to this person. But at this moment, there was no need to lament about history and the past. He was here for revenge, or rather, he was here to carry out his own trial. Colonel Lake only had time to say one word before the high-powered Langer pistol made a muffled sound. The high-powered bullet shot into Colonel Lake's jaw, penetrated his slightly open palate, broke through the adhesive tissue behind his nose that he was trying to take a deep breath, and quickly killed his brain that might still be preparing to repent. In the end, it tore through the occipital bone behind his head, which was more protruding than normal people's, and flew out with a whistling sound. The bullet blasted off the entire back of his head. The grayish-white sticky brain matter, mixed with dark red blood, spurted out from the terrifying hole and splashed on the dignified and righteous judgment platform behind him. It was a mess. Sulu burst out from the ground and pulled the trigger while aiming at Colonel Lake's jaw. It was actually just a moment, not more than 1 second. Lake only had time to say one word. There was a pair of deep eye sockets on his thin cheeks. His narrowed eyes were calm. Sulu silently thought in his heart, "I won't forgive a single one of you, and I won't give you a chance to repent." In the process of thinking this, he didn't look at Lake's body that was slowly falling down. The Langer pistol in his hand fired 2 consecutive shots to the side, hitting the right shoulder of 2 Iron 7th Division soldiers, shattering their shoulder bones into pieces. In an instant, a powerful force flowed into his tired legs. Between the spray of smoke and the flying pieces of the red carpet, Sulu jumped onto the judgment platform and broke through the wide floor-to-ceiling glass behind him. Concentrated gunshots rang out. Colonel Lake was charged with many crimes and was asked to be sentenced to 7 death sentences and executed by shooting. The Federation's military court ruled that he was not guilty. Sulu killed someone in court and was executed by shooting. Chapter 783. When the intense gunshots rang out in the courtroom, Sulu had already smashed through the floor-to-ceiling window and was falling to the hard ground outside the building with glass shards flying everywhere. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division blasted the courtroom bench into countless pieces, leaving countless deep marks on the walls, but they could no longer penetrate the walls and hit his body that was adjusting his posture at high speed. When the Iron 7th Division troops in charge of security outside the courtroom heard the gunshots, Su Lee's feet, which were wearing special military boots, had already landed heavily on the ground. Unlike ordinary Special Forces soldiers, he didn't roll forward to reduce the huge impact. Instead, he directly resisted the recoil of the ground with the strong muscle fibers under the skin of his legs. Using the few tenths of a second he saved, he quickly rushed forward more than 20 meters. The wall of the courtroom was right in front of him. The Longar high-firepower pistol in his right hand quickly fired at the walls around him. The purely mechanical trigger mechanism, under the pull of his index finger, which was like a steel spring, bounced up and down at an astonishing speed. In a very short period of time, he fired 23 times at high speed, completing a pistol rapid-fire demonstration that could definitely be written into the federal military textbooks. Bang! Bang! The vintage red bricks on the wall shattered one after another. as if countless deep bullet holes had appeared out of nowhere. As the bricks and debris flew everywhere, the soldiers on the first line of defense fell to the ground one after another. They didn't even have time to make any shooting movements, and most of them didn't even have time to turn around. After the initial moment of surprise, the troops outside the courtroom quickly made an efficient mobile response. They were Du Shaoqing's Iron 7th Division and had excellent military training that was unimaginable to ordinary troops. However, Su Li's terrifying speed at this time was faster than their reaction. In just 1 or 2 breaths, while the injured soldiers on the first line were still falling in the autumn wind, his figure had already jumped over the wall, stepped on the lawn, and ran toward the dense forest on the west side of Robbie Avenue. The 24 bullets in the Langer high firepower handguns magazine were all used up. While running, Su Li's right hand loosened. When a magazine slid to the side of his waist, the modified H-14 sniper rifle on his left shoulder was already tightly gripped in his hands. This continuous tactical movement was done in one go, and it did not affect his speed at all. All the strength in his body was mobilized, especially the muscle fibers in his legs, which were rubbing and squeezing at high speed. Accompanied by the familiar trembling and sour feeling, it provided him with a strong support of strength and speed. The special military boots on the soles of his feet were beginning to be unable to withstand the force of the high-speed sprint between his body and the ground. The surface of the boots was mottled and cracked, and it was possible that they would fall apart in the next moment. Su Lu, who was running on the lawn, was like a roaring high-speed car. The human body did not pay attention to aerodynamics. He directly and violently pushed the air that was beginning to become viscous to the side, causing the withered leaves on the lawn and the slightly dry soil in the grass to explode. It looked like his body was directly stirring up a cloud of dust. The courtyard wall fell behind him, the lawn was under his feet, and the dense forest was right in front of him. The 3 lines of defense of the Iron 7th Division were directly penetrated by Su Lu with his inhuman speed. The soldiers were moving at high speed in this direction. If one were to look at the current situation from the air, it would seem that the man running madly with the cloud of dust was like an arrowhead, forcibly pulling the circular defense of the Iron 7th Division into a triangular area. A shrill whistle cut through the air above the lawn, sounding dangerously. Following that, more gunshots rang out. Some bullets brushed past Su Li's calf while he was running, shooting deep into the slightly dry soil. The dense forest was right in front of him. It did not seem to be far, but the 2nd and 3rd lines of defense of the Iron 7th Division had quickly gathered and began to use fierce firepower to seal off the lawn. The moment the dense gunshots suddenly rang out from all directions, Su Lu, who was holding the gun with both hands and running with his head down, immediately recognized the guns used by the troops. The muffled sound of the muffled muzzles represented high-powered, mid-range hard sniper rifles that could easily blow his waist in half. As he ran at high speed, the slightly cool autumn air gradually turned into a frozen river that slapped against his face. Su Lu narrowed his eyes, but it was not because the annoying autumn wind disturbed his vision. It was just a habitual action when facing the greatest danger. His eyes were abnormally bright, like the sun hanging above the dense forest. In front of the dense forest, Su Li's right foot stomped heavily on the lawn. Because the dry and hard grass suddenly became deeply deformed, the military boots on his right foot finally could not withstand the enormous force and directly shattered. Even the thick sweatpants on his calf were directly torn apart by the sudden expansion of his leg muscles, and a few cracks appeared amidst the ripping sounds. Using the huge rebound force from the soles of his feet, Su Lu flew up at this moment, his body drawing a strange arc in the air as he ascended. A few bullets dangerously brushed past the soles of his feet. If his dodging action had been detected by the enemy, or if his speed had been 20% slower, these few bullets would have definitely hit his body accurately. The dense forest was cut into pieces by the dense rain of bullets, flying everywhere under the red sunset. In front of this peaceful and beautiful scene of the battlefield, Su Lu forcibly twisted his body in the air and retreated towards the dense forest at high speed. The H-14 in his hand switched to a sniper rifle and fiercely opened fire. At this moment, he retreated in the sky full of broken leaves, the gun in his hand spitting out beautiful flames. It was as if time and gravity had lost their effect, and the movement of everything had become slow. Only the sound of deformation could be heard, the mixture of dull and crisp, echoing between the lawn and the dense forest. Countless cold metal bullet shells were ejected from the side of the gun and slowly fell to the ground. Sulu retreated in the air for about less than a second. In this short period of time, while he was unable to stand firmly in the air, he completed the action of raising his gun, looking for a target, and pulling the trigger. What was really incredible was that he completed this action 6 times in a row, launching 6 accurate shots at the firing points of the Iron 7th Division's defensive line. If it was said that the rapid firing of the pistol when he rushed out of the courtroom could be perfectly written into the textbooks of the federal military, then the backward sniping and continuous shooting technique that Sulu displayed at this moment was completely a template that ordinary soldiers would not be able to learn. This was because no one had the strength and terrifying reaction speed that he had. Pooh, 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 pooh. Around the courtroom, 6 firing points that were not in the same area were hit by Sulu's precise shots. The modified H-14 sniper rifle perfectly adapted to this terrifying rate of fire, and the large-caliber bullets mercilessly penetrated the temporary workers and hit the fastest elite shooters of the Iron 7th Division. The dense gunshots suddenly became sparse, but Sulu, who was falling, still narrowed his eyes. His gaze was bright, and his left hand pressed the button on the spare magazine on his belt, and he whispered, "I'm going to die." After landing on the lawn, even though they had entered the dense forest, they were still in the area between the 2nd and 3rd line of defense of the Iron 7th Division. The few elite shooters closest to them were already lying in pools of blood, but there were more soldiers in the distance. The military quality of the Iron 7th Division's troops was unquestionable. They would definitely not charge blindly. Instead, they would choose to use the temporary workers and terrain, as well as the real firepower of their guns, to force Sulu into a desperate situation. Although Sulu had a pair of mechanic's sharp eyes, and his eyesight was better than before after the breakthrough in the Empire, he still could not capture all the blind spots around him and see every dangerous enemy. It was impossible for him to rely on a modified H-14 to suppress or eliminate the enemy in the midst of the smoke and falling leaves, because he was not the omnipotent God of creation. Only the omniscient could be omnipotent. Landing heavily on the lawn, Sulu's movements did not slow down at all. He quickly retreated into the forest, his hands holding the H-14 steadily in front of his eyes. He aimed at the enemy's firing points that he could see clearly, and he pulled the trigger continuously without hesitation, emptying the magazine of bullets. Across the lawn, on both sides of the forest, and even behind him, the gunshots that had just stopped for a moment rang out intensely again. Sulu's thin face flashed with a trace of ruthlessness, and he roared angrily, "I'm going to die." No one knew why Sulu yelled angrily at the empty lawn at the most dangerous moment. Could it be that if you said at sunset that you were going to die, you wouldn't die? The modified H-14 did not make any noise, but Sulu clearly knew that the magazine had been emptied. His left hand took out the spare magazine at lightning speed, and his right thumb pulled the empty magazine out with force, completing the action of reloading at a speed that was almost impossible to be seen clearly by the naked eye. With a crisp click, the magazine accurately entered the H-14. Following this sound, it was as if a switch had been turned on. The chip at the back of his neck heated up slightly, and on the screen full of bullets from sunset and no falling leaves, countless grids instantly appeared, as well as countless precise images of human bodies with citizen numbers hanging on them. Whether it was in the shooting range, hiding behind the forest, hiding in the depths of the grass, or hiding in the high court, the positions of all the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division accurately appeared on his retina. Even the scene behind him, which was completely invisible to the naked eye, entered his eyes through some kind of strange imaging method. He could even see the precise coordinates of these targets and the extremely detailed, simulated human body composition. Sulu was no stranger to these scenes. Back then, when he was in a desperate situation at the Four Prefectures Foundation building, when he was surrounded by the Imperial Army in the forest at 3320, when the creatures died, he could see this scene that was completely different from the real world. There was no smoke or blood, only the smell of a shooting game. The charter network that covered every inch of the Federation's land presented these images in front of his eyes using countless military satellites and ubiquitous surveillance systems. There seemed to be a faint sigh in Su Li's mind, but he did not pay attention to it. He silently raised his gun and quickly pulled the trigger. He did not need to aim, nor did he need to hesitate, because from this moment on, there was nothing he did not know and nothing he could not do. This is really desperate. Writing is too difficult. Incomparable anxiety. Because before writing this chapter, I knew that it would not be easy to write, especially to write it well. Also, this paragraph must be written well, otherwise I would feel sorry for myself. Fortunately, I liked the image presented at the end. It was worth the torturous night. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.